Chapter 1. The Subway Sirens. Stepan Fedorovich walked slightly ahead, gripping his track key. The lamplight danced on the reflective strips of his orange vest that hugged his pot belly tight. Sergei stayed close to his mentor, stepping along the reinforced concrete ties and shining his flashlight on the rails, searching for any visible damage. "It's so quiet here," the guy whispered, afraid that otherwise the echo would carry his voice throughout the entire tunnel. They had been trudging through the cellular underground corridor for a long time without meeting anyone, and it seemed that the unnatural silence was thickening more and more with each step. "Quiet?" Stepan Fedorovich asked in full voice and stroked his trimmed mustache with his gloved hand. "It's just Sunday today. Only track walkers are on the rails. Other services aren't working. That's why it seems to you that we're the only ones left in the whole world." Stepan Fedorovich chuckled and waved his hand, pointing ahead. "There's a ventilation shaft further up. That thing hums like a locomotive, especially in winter. But you can't hear it from here yet." The mentor and trainee stopped to inspect the third rail brackets. Stepan Fedorovich made a note in the track walker's log about the malfunction they found, and they continued along their route. There was very little time left before the metro opened, and they still had a lot of small tasks ahead. "I know what you want to ask me," Stepan Fedorovich suddenly said while he and the trainee were checking one of the bolts at a joint. "You're keeping quiet, but I can read the question right in your eyes." "And what's that?" Sergei perked up, brushing long strands of hair from his face. "About Metro 2, the aging track walker smiled broadly. "All you green kids want to know if it really exists. That's the second most popular question from trainees after mutant rats." "And what's the answer?" the guy asked. "There aren't any rats here, of course. Think about it yourself. What would they eat in these empty tunnels?" "I'm not asking about rats. I'm asking about METRO2. "Yeah, I know." Stepan Fedorovich laughed, and his deep-set eyes gleamed mischievously. "I'm just messing with you, Sergei. Don't hold it against an old man. As for the secret metro, many of our guys insist that special branches exist, stretching at great depth from the Kremlin itself, supposedly so the government can escape in case of emergency. But personally, I believe there are no secret lines in the subway and never have been. It's just tall tales. You can't know that for sure, though," the trainee noted. They had finished with the bolt and returned to patrolling their section. "The metro is huge. To investigate it thoroughly would take years. I've been working in the subway for over 20 years. I've worked on all kinds of lines and stations during that time, talked to all sorts of people. So trust me, I know what I'm talking about." Sergei remained silent, and his mentor couldn't resist needling him. "What? Did the metro suddenly lose all its mysterious charm for you?" Sergei didn't answer, just bent lower toward the rails, pretending to carefully examine non-existent cracks. "Come on, don't get upset. Want me to tell you a couple other stories that we use to scare newbies around here?" "Nonsense, of course, but young folks like you only need that kind of stuff, right? So there's more horror and your blood runs cold while you're walking through deserted tunnels at night." Sergei didn't show how his mentor's words interested him, and said indifferently, "Well, I guess I could listen." "Then listen up." Stepan Fedorovich habitually touched his mustache and, glancing over the underground infrastructure, slowly began his story. At the old stations lying under the very center of the city, it happens that in the evenings or late at night, when almost no people are left in the metro, a phantom train passes through. Many track workers still tell stories about how, while inspecting their section, they suddenly heard the rumble of an approaching train in the tunnel. Thinking it was maintenance cars with a crew or equipment, they stepped aside. But a train woven from haze rushed past them, whose otherworldly red headlight filled the tunnel with eerie radiance, and it seemed there was nowhere to hide from it. No passengers in the cars, the engineer's cab empty. After rushing by, the train dissolved completely into the echoing corridors of the subway, and only a deathly cold lingered in the air for a long time, chilling to the bone, as if death herself on her iron horse had galloped within a meter of you. The mentor glanced at the newbie, expecting his reaction, but Sergei said quite coolly, "Old story. I first heard it when I was about 7. Back then all this seemed very scary, of course, but now the story of the phantom train only makes me nostalgic for childhood." The aging track walker raised his eyebrows in surprise, thought for a moment, and said, "Well, okay. I've got something scarier. Listen about the black engineer?" Yeah, Sergei immediately interrupted. "A burned man walks through the subway seeking justice." We know. Then maybe you haven't heard about the track walker? Is that the story about the dead workaholic? That's pretty crude to talk about our brotherhood like that." "Well, What do you know about the sculptures from Revolution Square? Everything there is to know. Stepan Fedorovich grunted, gripped his track key tighter, and fell silent for almost a full minute, obviously going through all the subway horror stories he knew in his head. Sergei watched him with a slight smirk, suspecting that his mentor wouldn't surprise him with anything new. But the track worker suddenly shuddered, thoughtfully stroked his mustache, and said, "There's one story. You've hardly heard that one anywhere." "Really?" Sergei doubted. "This story is only told by local old-timers who've been working at this station for more than a decade." The track walker suddenly became very serious, straightened his shoulders, and spoke insinuatingly. "Back when this metro line was just being laid, when stations appeared slowly, one after another, and multi-ton tunneling machines gnawed into the earth, grinding stones to dust, it happened that one section of wall in the tunnel dug by the shield couldn't hold and collapsed." Stepan Fedorovich stepped off the tracks and pointed at the cast iron segments, outlining in the air the boundaries of the imaginary break he was describing. The builders started figuring out how this happened and discovered the earth had caved in because behind it lay extensive and deep catacombs. An incredible find, but those people who went to explore these labyrinths never returned. Time after time they sent whole groups there with equipment and everything necessary, but only once did a wounded wretch come back, who miraculously made it out, practically losing his mind in the process. In agony he kept repeating that these catacombs descended to the very center of the earth, and there, on the deep levels, lived such creatures as humanity had never seen. Relics, the first beings of this world, who went underground and have been hiding there for millennia. And now that people had disturbed them, there would be no peace for anyone ever again. Sergei tried to cut into the story, but his mentor impatiently stopped him. "I'm not finished yet." Stepan Fedorovich sternly furrowed his brows and chewed his lips, as if pondering what to say and what not to. After that incident, it was decided not to send anyone else into the catacombs, and for safety to close that section of track. They changed the plan for the metro line being laid and continued their work, and the resulting dead end with the breach in the wall was sealed. But they had already opened Pandora's box, and as the Mad Herald promised, there was no more peace for anyone. Taking a second break to catch his breath and cast a quick glance at the tracks running into the tunnel's twilight, the track worker continued. Several years later, when construction was finished and life was bustling at the new stations, metro workers started saying that they constantly sensed strange things on one single stretch. Sometimes voices, sometimes someone's footsteps, sometimes shadows sway by themselves, and occasionally you hear the sound of a moving train when there's no train or maintenance car in the tunnel. If you listen carefully, it becomes clear that the sound is coming from behind the wall, where there's nothing. But more often than anything else, tunnelers and installers heard singing, such enchantingly beautiful singing, as if sea sirens were luring them. "Sirens? In the subway?" Sergei asked quite seriously. "Yes, that's what they started calling these invisible singers. Sirens. They also said that whoever hears their call and goes toward it will surely disappear." Many connected this to the sealed catacombs, since all the strange things happened and still happen to this day only on the stretch where the dead end is located. "This is that very stretch, Sergei. We're walking on it right now. And somewhere around here this walled-up tunnel still exists? Maybe it does. I've never deliberately looked for it. And I won't." Stepan Fedorovich scowled, lowered his head, and a shadow fell across his face. "You told this story differently than the first one," the guy noticed, studying his mentor. "Like you witnessed it all yourself. I heard the sirens singing once. Or rather, something very much like it." Sergei's eyebrows rose in surprise. "I was patrolling my section and suddenly heard distant, drawn-out singing floating in the distance. I stood there listening for a long time. So many times the old-timers had retold their stories to me. And then, what do you know? Everything was just like in their tales. Wonderful voices calling me from the dark tunnels." "And what did you do?" "I went back to work." "What else should I have done, in your opinion?" "You never completely believed it, did you?" "My boy, all these horror stories are made up just to scare young people. And you and I can argue for a long time about what we imagine and what we don't in the darkness and solitude among the echoing metro tunnels. Though I'll confess one thing to you. That singing I thought I heard was truly and humanly beautiful." A few weeks later, Sergei's training period came to an end. He said a warm goodbye to Stepan Fedorovich, thanking him for his guidance and instruction, and finally set off into the tunnel alone for an independent patrol of his assigned track section. His first shifts he wandered alone through his domain, listening to the distant voices of other workers and the fading rumble of maintenance cars, tapping rail joints with his hammer between tasks. On weekdays the tunnel was still lively. He met colleagues, installers, electrical mechanics and signal workers he could exchange a few words with. But on Sunday Sergei was left to himself, sharing the night with the muffled howling of the ventilation shaft and the sound of his own footsteps. It was on just such a deserted night shift that he first heard quiet, barely audible singing floating under the arches of the underground corridor. Freezing, the guy didn't believe his own ears, but the longer he listened, the clearer the strengthening voice of the singer became. Neither female nor male, androgynously sexless, producing such impossible sounds that were simply beyond human vocal cords. Like a lamb to the call of a shepherd's bell, Sergei wandered forward, toward where the unearthly sad melody was coming from, drawing him to itself, igniting in his soul a flame of hope for a quick meeting with the amazing singer. He so wanted to touch this miracle. Turning from the main tunnel onto a service-connecting branch, the guy quickened his pace, and the singing became louder and closer. In impatience he rushed forward, afraid that the spell of the song might suddenly dissipate. Dark gray walls, snaking lines of wires, lights and marker signs flashed by, merging into a single blurred line, until Sergei dove into the portal of a darkened chamber that ended with a massive hermetic seal. The giant blackened door seemed tightly closed. The guy approached closer and touched the steel surface, noticing how the siren's singing was fading. However, sound shouldn't have penetrated so easily through the thick locked door, and Sergei carefully examined the mechanism with his flashlight, quickly convincing himself that the hermetic seals were actually slightly open. A person could quite squeeze through the narrow gap, which is what Sergei eventually did. As soon as he found himself on the other side and illuminated the interior space of the dead-end tunnel with his flashlight, his heart did a somersault in his chest and stopped. With trembling hands he found his phone in his coverall pocket and, even knowing that the message would only go through at the station, typed and sent a short text in advance. I found it. Chapter 2. Passage into the Unknown. The meeting was supposed to take place next Sunday in the tunnel near the ventilation chamber. Timur was going to climb through the cable duct connecting the metro's ventilation shaft with the traction substation on the surface. It was the closest convenient entry point, especially if you had keys to the underground service doors. Sergei, who had changed after his shift into comfortable khaki pants and a fleece sweater, waited for him at the agreed spot, nervously glancing at his wristwatch. His best friend was 11 minutes late, which was unlike him. But finally, rustling could be heard from the vertical shaft of the ventilation duct, followed by the sound of footsteps on the grated flooring and panting. Timur peeked around the corner to make sure his buddy had waited for him. In his black pants and hoodie, he completely blended with the shadows, standing out only with the pale oval of his face. Waving to his friend with relief, Timur emerged from hiding and started talking rapidly. Damn. Can you believe it? Some old lady sat down to sell sour cabbage right in front of the substation. Couldn't walk by without being spotted, couldn't chase her away. Had to buy all her goods so the old bag would go home. So I'm here with, provisions. He grinned crookedly and began pulling cabbage wrapped in plastic bags from his backpack. Leaving the now unnecessary purchases right on the floor, Timur scratched his closely cropped head and hurried his friend. Come on, unlock the gate. I can't wait to see our catacombs. They were separated by a high fence with a small service door. Sergei was standing right next to it, spinning a bunch of keys on his finger. It's been open for a while. Come through. I just need to return the keys before my shift starts, before midnight, so no one notices they're missing. Don't worry, we'll return them. Timur responded cheerfully, opening the door. Or do you think we won't manage to explore these catacombs from top to bottom in 18 hours? Sergei, brushing the eternally bothersome strands from his eyes, extended his palm in greeting. Well, if we don't run into any more old ladies with cabbage, we should manage. Exchanging handshakes, the guys smiled broadly at each other, anticipating their new joint adventure. Only Timur's white-toothed smile suddenly faded when he noticed another person crouching behind Sergei, hidden in the shadows all this time. Have you completely lost your mind? Timur instantly flared up, yanking his palm from his friend's hand. Why did you bring Karina on? The girl, hearing her name, flinched and easily rose to her feet. Her usually loose copper-brown hair was gathered in a tight braid, and Karina had traded her usual short dresses for rough jeans and a purple windbreaker for the first time. which amazed Timur. He was used to thinking that this princess despised any normal human clothing except her airy outfits and high heels. I didn't drag her. She expressed a desire to come with us to the catacombs herself. She climbed the same way you did, by the way. And you're going to let her tag along with us underground? I decided, why not? Sergei shrugged. Why not? Timur raged and accusingly pointed his finger at Karina. She has no preparation at all. Where has she been down before? Maybe to the basement for potatoes. That's not true. I've been to Neglinka and Solyanka, the girl said in her defense. Kids walks. Timur spat contemptuously. Sergei shot him a dark look. Why are you picking on her? We're not breaking into a secret government facility. Sergei, Timur sharply cut him off. You and I have been collecting dust in abandoned places and metro construction for how many years? Since high school. That's about 10 years, probably not less. I don't doubt my experience, just like I don't doubt yours. But taking a newbie with us just like that, without even warning me, that's not serious. I didn't expect such crap from you. Well, excuse me. Sergei also started getting worked up. I had no idea. I couldn't decide for myself who I should and shouldn't take on expeditions. If this bothers you so much, then I'll take complete responsibility for her safety. Timur crossed his arms on his chest irreconcilably, expressing disagreement with his whole appearance. We're not going anywhere with this group. Even if you carry her in your arms, I won't agree. This isn't games. We're preparing to penetrate abandoned catacombs under the metro, about which there's no data except urban legends. And you want to drag dead weight? I'm not dead weight, Karina protested. I'm standing right here and hearing everything. If your hearing is fine, then listen to me and go home. Leave the metro and catacombs to experienced diggers. Tim, don't talk to her like that, Sergei said threateningly. And his voice carried a chill. If she doesn't go, I'm staying too. And you can be sure I won't tell you where exactly the entrance to the catacombs is. Timur stared at his best friend in surprise, not expecting such words from him. We've been searching for confirmation of this urban legend for so many years. And you'll just dump me like that one step from the goal? Exactly, Tim. For years you and I have been poking around the subway, monitoring forums for scraps of information. I got this job just to check everything and find the entry point. And now, when everything is finally ready, you're making a scene because my girlfriend simply wanted to keep us company. Do you want to ruin all our work just because of your principles? Karina, the cause of the unfolding quarrel, stood next to Sergei with her big eyes framed by fluffy lashes downcast. But there wasn't much remorse to be read in them. Listen, Timur made another attempt. It's one thing that you now drag her to all our parties and drinking sessions, but it's completely different. Into the subway and catacombs, where anything can happen, from collision with a train or touching the third rail to cave-ins in the caves. She could get hurt or change her mind and ask to go home in the middle of the journey. She's a pampered girl. Shut up, Sergei angrily cut him off. I'm responsible for her. It's not your concern. I just need an answer to the question. Are you with us, or do we forget about the catacombs and go home right now? Sergei extended his open palm to his friend, and Timur, clenching his teeth, stared at it with a darkened gaze for some time. He didn't like being put before a choice he didn't want to make. Time's running out, Sergei reminded him, glancing at the green digits of his wristwatch. Fine. Timur gave in and shook the extended palm. Let's go with this group. But I'm not going to listen to her complaints and whining if something goes wrong. I perfectly understand that I'm not going for a walk in the park, Karina replied, offendedly sticking out her lower lip, and picked up her compact backpack from the floor. Sergei looked over his best friend and girlfriend from head to toe, handed out prepared hard hats with flashlights to everyone, and was the first to leave the safe shelter of the ventilation chamber, stepping onto the concrete shoulder of the tunnel. Karina and Timur followed him like shadows. A train will pass here soon, he warned his companions walking behind, hearing distant rumbling. We need to make it to the crossover. Quick! The trio, lining up in a column, hurried forward, holding their backpack straps. Timur ran last, and Karina's braid kept annoyingly flashing before his eyes, not allowing his irritation to settle in his soul. He couldn't believe he had agreed to the company of this empty-headed girl. I'll be surprised if she doesn't cause us problems, flashed through his mind. The headlights of the approaching train illuminated the tunnel and three silhouettes gliding along the wall. This way! Run! Sergei dove into the crossover and pulled Karina in by the hand. Timur jumped into the safe passage last, already feeling the wind raised by the rushing train tickling his neck. Whoa, Karina exhaled, staring wide-eyed at the blurred body of the steel giant rushing past their shelter. This was completely different from looking at the windows of a passing train at a station. Here it seemed like a deep-sea predator stalking its victims in the darkness with its bright yellow eyes. Will we run from the next train too? The girl asked quietly. No. The corner of Sergei's lips twitched in a smile. We only have a couple steps left here. As the guy promised, once the train disappeared, he led his friends out of the crossover, and after a few meters the previously found unlit chamber with the hermetic seal appeared. Of course, Karina admired the size of the door, which only made Timur roll his eyes, anticipating that such comments would accompany him the entire way. So you're saying the seal was open? He asked Sergei, examining the massive mechanical drive. Yeah, and open from the outside, naturally. You couldn't break it down from the inside even with a train. According to legend, they locked the track section so no one could climb out of the catacombs. Well, apparently they didn't lock it tight enough. Sergei clicked on his helmet flashlight and slipped through the gap. Or maybe someone, like us, decided to take a peek at what's inside. His voice was muffled by the thick metal panel of the hermetic seal. And never returned, Timur finished for his friend. And although he didn't put any special meaning into these words, Karina still cast a frightened glance at the guy who remained alone with her on this side of the door. There it is! Timur mentally triumphed. Looks like the girl is scared as hell. She's only acting brave in front of Sergei to impress him. This means if I scare her good right now, she'll change her mind about going with us and run home to mommy, dropping everything. This idea pleased Timur so much that he broke into a wide, white-toothed grin. Karina warily glanced at the guy silently grinning at her and slipped after Sergei through the door crack. Timur leisurely overcame the seal barrier after Karina and froze in admiration, like his friends, surveying the abandoned dead end. The unlit oblong chamber was half paved with concrete blocks. Further on, a narrow section of bare-packed earth was visible, a broken concrete ring, and the tilted rotor of a tunneling shield. Holy crap! Timur exclaimed, turning on his flashlight. A shield. A real, goddamn shield. Sergei watched his friend's genuine joy with a smile. When he first stepped behind the hermetic gates and saw the remains of the giant tunneling machine, he was also thrilled. To be precise, only the rotor is left here. This is the main element of the complex. Its cutting organ, the guy explained for Karina, who was silently examining the round piece of iron. She honestly didn't understand what was so cool about this junk, but pretended to be interested. Where's the rest of the complex? Timur asked, eagerly investigating the shield. Most likely dismantled and removed from here in pieces. Why did they leave the rotor then? It's damaged. Walk around and see for yourself, Sergei advised. Timur carefully squeezed around the side of the tilted shield and surveyed the metal giant, its cutters and milling heads. The flashlight beam penetrated through the rotor openings, casting dancing shadows on the chamber walls and on Sergei and Karina, who had frozen not far from the entrance. Damn, it's really broken, Timur shouted. A whole chunk is missing here, like someone deliberately broke it out. No, I don't think so. That's just impossible, Sergei objected. How long are you planning to hang around there? The catacombs are waiting for us. You know, crap. Right. Timur emerged from behind the rotor, casting one last loving glance at it. Well, show us where the entrance is. I can't wait to meet the terrifying underground inhabitants who will strip the meat from my bones, Timur said jokingly and secretly watched Karina's reaction. As he expected, the girl shuddered. Don't talk nonsense, Sergei muttered, approaching the far part of the tunnel where a narrow strip of earth was visible. Throwing aside corrugated steel sheets covered with dirt and stones, he exposed a ragged black opening leading somewhere down. Karina and Timur simultaneously stepped forward, almost colliding, to peer into the hole that seemed bottomless to them. Is this definitely it? The girl asked in a whisper for some reason. I went down there on reconnaissance when I found it, Sergei admitted, aiming his flashlight beam into the abyss. Just to look around, make sure it wasn't an ordinary void. And it really is catacombs. The galleries stretch quite far. Timur nodded to his own thoughts and, grabbing the uneven edge of the breach, stuck his head inside. Well, rookies, I'm going. If they eat me first, promise to clear the search history on my computer. And nimbly dove into the passage, disappearing into the belly of darkness. Sergei was about to follow his friend, but Karina suddenly grabbed him under the elbow. Are you sure there's nothing and no one living down there? She asked timidly. Are you scared? The guy was surprised, examining Karina's round, sweet face where a shadow of anxiety had settled. If you don't want to go down, I'm not forcing you. I can cancel everything right now. I just thought you expressed a desire to go with us yourself. No, I really wanted to. The girl grabbed Sergei's palm and squeezed it tightly, intertwining their fingers. And I still do. You're constantly climbing around abandoned places in the metro. It's so cool. And I want to share your interests. Always be near. Sergei leaned toward Karina's face and gently kissed her parted lips. Then don't be afraid of anything, little mouse. Don't let imaginary fears deprive you of your sense of reality. If you think only about monsters and ghosts, you won't see what beautiful things are actually hidden underground. With me, you have nothing to fear. Without unlacing their fingers, he led the girl to the breach in the wall, and Karina obediently stepped after him, feeling her cheeks flush with color. Chapter 3. The Other Metro. The smooth stone galleries turned out to be winding and changeable. They would expand, allowing the friends to walk at full height, then suddenly compress into tight passages like rabbit holes. The elevation changes were minor. The sloping stepped corridors descended smoothly enough that the climbing ropes stored in their backpacks weren't needed yet. Timur walked first, actively looking around, and the light of his flashlight ran along the walls like an elusive sunbeam. Sergei made his way behind him, always ready to kindly push his friend if he got stuck somewhere. Karina walked last, keeping Sergei's back in sight, but for some reason she felt uneasy even behind such a reliable shoulder. The girl kept looking back at the dark tunnels the trio left behind. There were many narrow branches that they didn't check and didn't enter, choosing the most accessible path, drawing chalk arrows on the stone. Mentally, Karina cursed herself for cowardice, as she constantly imagined suspicious rustling in the darkness. As if behind them, beyond the circle of light, someone was invisibly creeping in their tracks. I see something ahead. Timur called out and immediately cursed restrainedly, hitting his helmet on a small ledge he hadn't noticed. Listen, there's an exit here, apparently. With these words, Timur quickened his pace and stepped from the tight throat of the passage into open space. But he almost immediately froze when the flashlight beam picked out from the darkness a long, straight tunnel lined with dark gray stone and a narrow rail track. Timur drawled, blinking in confusion. What's there? Karina hurried Sergei, and they both tumbled out of the underground gallery, crowding Timur. Careful, he asked grumpily and immediately added, Sergei, looks like this is a total bust. The catacombs just connect two metro lines. What? See for yourself. We're still in the metro. It was Karina and Sergei's turn to look around, illuminating the gray corridor with their flashlight beams. As Timur said, the catacombs had led them not to unexplored depths at all, but to an ordinary metro tunnel. This just can't be, Sergei protested weakly, dropping his backpack and starting to rummage through it. When a folded metro underground communications plan covered with numerous notes appeared in his hands, the guy glanced at the paper and exclaimed restrainedly, "But look! There are no metro lines here, no depots, no tracks, nothing at all. Plus, we were constantly going down. Could we have stumbled onto METRO2? Timur said dreamily, and his brown eyes shone with the hope that filled them. Are you stupid? Sergei grumbled good-naturedly, running his finger along the diagram. You know as well as I do where exactly the special branches run under the city and how impossible it is to get on them. Guys, Karina called to the boys quietly, feeling the tunnel lining with her hand. Doesn't it seem strange to you how everything looks here? The friends obediently turned their gazes to the corridor arches. These are stone blocks, Timur noted uncertainly. But our metro is lined with either concrete or cast iron segments. Sergei in turn noticed the walls. There are no cables and wires here. And no third rail. This could just be a very old tunnel, right? Abandoned or walled up? Karina asked, turning to her companions. Sergei nodded and folded the metro plans, throwing them back in his backpack. If so, then trains don't run here, and in that case we can explore everything calmly. Shall we go? Moving along the walls, the trio listened to the silence of the found tunnel. Besides their footsteps, only the sound of water dripping somewhere could be clearly heard in the darkness. Karina cheered up internally once the confined catacombs were left behind, although the damp walls of this gloomy tunnel didn't inspire optimism either. How wonderful it would be, she thought hopefully, if we found nothing else here and it all ended. She'd had enough impressions from the short walk. Is that a platform up ahead? Timur said, squinting. Damn, The girl cursed mentally and quickened her pace, trying to keep up with the guys. Upon closer inspection, the found platform turned out to be quite low and narrow. Decorative arches adorned the wall it adjoined, and patches of moss were visible here and there on the dark gray stone. And, except for the moss, there was nothing for the eye to catch on to. Where's the station hall itself? Karina wondered, walking along the false arches that didn't break anywhere. Where's the passage from the platform? How do you get here without going through the tunnel? There's a possibility this is just a technical platform, a small station for service work, Timur suggested lazily. Or it used to be, until they closed it. But even so, there should be an exit here or at least one door. Karina, confident in her own rightness, wandered along the platform, carefully examining the wall as if a secret passage unnoticed by anyone could really be hidden in it. Timur shifted his gaze from the departing girl to his friend. He stood nearby, puzzled, fiddling with his old, job, brand wristwatch. What the hell? Sergei muttered, turning the winding crown. Is the battery dying or something? Timur craned his neck to see the dial where green numbers glowed. They're going backward. That's just it. They're going backward. Oh, to hell with it. Sergei irritably loosened the strap and pulled the watch off his wrist, shoving it in his pants pocket. I'll figure it out at home. Timur cast another quick glance at the purple spot flickering in the distance and, making sure it hadn't gotten closer, said quietly to his friend, You know, I never thought you'd become such a whipped boyfriend. What do you mean? Sergei frowned, drilling into his friend's face with his gaze as if he hadn't understood a single word he'd said. I mean it literally, Sergei. Before, man, it was so good. We wanted to poke around a bomb shelter under the factory, backpacks in our teeth and let's go. Skinnier Shira called us to a digger party. You were already lacing up your boots and stuffing vodka in your pockets. But ever since you hooked up with Karina 6 months ago, you've become like a different person. Slow to get moving, won't go to parties without her. Now you're dragging her through the subway too, even though it's obvious this metro stuff means nothing to her. She asked to come herself, Sergei answered shortly, darkening even more. And you're just happy to indulge her momentary whim, right? That's what being whipped means, bro. When you fulfill all her whims and don't think with your own head. She just wants to drag along everywhere with you to control who you talk to, what you do. And you won't even notice how Karina completely reshapes your life to her liking, however convenient for her. You're getting on my nerves. Sergei spat with some irritation. I bring her with me because I love her. And I don't want to be apart for even an hour. Got it. I like being with her together, everywhere and anywhere. Did you pick up this mushy crap from her? Timur asked, curling his lips in disgust. What about our brotherhood? Why did you give up on that? We've been friends since school. Went through fire, water, and sewer pipes together, but as soon as a woman appeared, you changed completely. I have a feeling that pretty soon you'll brush me off like a fly. Judging by the rolling muscles in his jaw, Sergei was close to telling his friend to go to hell right now, but he restrained himself, exhaled through clenched teeth, and said, Tim, you're my buddy. But she's my girlfriend. It's normal, damn it, that I want to give time not only to you but to her too. Sorry. So give it to her. But why did you have to bring her here, on our expedition? I didn't sign up to be the third wheel on your date. I just wanted to poke around under the metro with my friend. You're driving me crazy. Sergei snapped and turned on his heels. I'm not holding you here. If our company doesn't suit you, get lost. He resolutely walked toward the end of the platform where Karina, crouching, was feeling the moss on the stones. Timur remained standing in proud solitude, feeling the powerless rage brewing in his soul. The friendship he treasured more than anything in the world was crumbling before his eyes, and it seemed he had only accelerated the process by trying to talk about everything. And once upon a time, Sergei Lykov, a shaggy, smiling boy transferred to their 6th grade from another school, had been the first to extend his palm to Timur, offering friendship. To him, Timur Strelnikov, a beaten loner in the back row, with a cheek swollen from fresh paternal punches, with scars from cigarette burns on his arms, barely healed after another of his mother's drinking binges. And Sergei never asked about his worn, crookedly patched clothes, about nervous flinching at any noise and reluctance to go home after school. They just became friends and spent whole days climbing through abandoned construction sites, whiling away time together. His friend had been his support for many years, and now that support was being shaken from under his feet. He bitterly watched Sergei and Karina cooing at the other end of the platform, seriously considering leaving them there and returning to the catacombs, when a distant sound from the tunnel depths caught his attention. "Guys!" Timur called to his friends in confusion, but they didn't hear him, busy with each other. Then he repeated louder, "Guys! A train's coming!" Sergei turned sharply, listening, as did Karina. Far in the darkness of the stone tunnel, the rumble of an approaching train was growing, one that shouldn't have been running on these abandoned tracks. Timur covered the distance separating him from his companions in a few seconds at a run. "But there's no third rail here," Karina mumbled in horror. "How's it moving? It's a handcar or a diesel maintenance vehicle." Timur dismissed the girl's stupid question. "We need to turn off our lights and hide. If there are installers there, they'll chase us out of here with wet rags." The trio hurriedly extinguished their lights, remaining in complete darkness, and huddled in the niche of a decorative arch, since there were no other hiding places on the platform. The tunnel glowed red, as if the sun was rising in its depths, and in a couple of seconds the entire corridor was flooded with thick bloody radiance. The deafening roar of the train burst onto the platform, accompanied by the clatter of wheels and a wave of bone-chilling cold. The train shot out of the tunnel, raising clouds of murky dust into the air, and unexpectedly braked sharply opposite the lonely platform. Metal screeched, a shower of orange sparks burst from under the wheels and sprayed in all directions. The four-car train stopped by the technical station and opened its doors with a crash, inviting passengers to take their seats. The trio of friends stared in mute amazement at the yellow-beige train, which definitely had nothing in common with either a handcar or maintenance vehicle. The vintage Soviet cars, illuminated from within by the dim pale straw glow of lamps, were completely empty. No one left the train, and no one was on the brown leather seats. "It's empty," Sergei said, swallowing thick saliva. Just in case, he looked around, making sure that people wanting to board the train hadn't suddenly appeared on the platform. "Damn it, I'm more concerned about what's making it move," Timur muttered to himself. "Unless it's coasting with the engines off." He mumbled something else, then fell silent, like his companions, waiting for the train to leave the service station lost in the subway depths. But the wait dragged on. "Why isn't it leaving?" Karina whispered. "Like it's waiting for us." Cutting through the tunnel darkness with its red headlights, the train still stood by the station with its door panels wide open, shrouded in a strange curtain of dust. Growing bolder and tired of hiding, Timur approached the first car and stepped over the threshold. Looking around the cabin, he drawled, "Beauty IFUL. Like in a museum. Aren't you afraid they'll see us?" Karina hissed from hiding. "Listen, these seem to be type of cars, pre-war production." "That can't be," Sergei objected, jumping up. "There are hardly any left. And there definitely shouldn't be any running ones." "You're lying." Wanting to prove his point, Sergei ran into the car to Timur and focused on searching for the factory plate. Karina, frightened of being left alone on the dark platform, hurried after her boyfriend, quickly jumping into the lit cabin. And as soon as she crossed the threshold, all the train doors simultaneously slammed shut with a dull thud, like a mousetrap. "Awesome," Timur said with feeling, gripping the handrail as the train jerked sharply into motion. "And where's it taking us now? We should have stayed on the platform. Why did you climb in here?" Karina whined disappointedly, falling onto a seat. Sergei, abandoning his search for the plate, stood in the middle of the aisle, arms crossed on his chest, giving the train's interior a dark look. "You shouldn't have followed us. You would have stayed safe," Timur snapped at the girl. "Alone? In the dark, in the middle of an abandoned tunnel?" "Stop it," Sergei interrupted them. "We're already inside, and the train is taking us somewhere. We're not going to jump out while it's moving. This is all so strange, and even creepy." Karina shuddered from the cold, and noticing Timur's drilling gaze, fell silent. But Sergei was thinking about the same thing. He pondered the red light of the headlights, the empty vintage cars, and one detail that had seemed odd to him. When the train was braking, the guy hadn't seen anyone in the engineer's cab. But voicing these thoughts aloud would mean scaring Karina to tears. The train raced through the tunnel in a steep spiral. The road kept turning and seemed to lead downward at a slight angle. At the very moment when the trio began to noticeably get nervous about the absence of any stops, the train began to slow down. Soon it smoothly braked in the middle of pitch black unknown and widely opened its doors. Sergei was the first to look outside the car, noticed a cracked platform flooded with darkness, and got off the train. Timur followed his friend, more out of caution than politeness, holding the doors for Karina, who stepped off last. The girl lingered inside the vintage car for a moment longer than the guys. She looked back to see if she had forgotten anything on the seat. And at that very moment, the lamps in the old white shades flickered, and for exactly one heartbeat, Karina saw that all the seats in the cabin were occupied by phantoms woven from shadows. Passengers wrapped in overcoats, metro workers in old-fashioned uniform tunics, small children clutching toys, and track walkers in signal vests with track keys in their hands. And all of them, without exception, turning their heads toward Karina, drilled the girl with the blackness of sunken eye sockets. Chapter 4. At the bottom of the graveyard. So where are we? Timur voiced the question, tormenting the entire trio. Putting his hands on his hips and spreading his legs wide in rubber boots, he stood in the middle of the platform where the train had brought them and inhaled the air through his nose. A new shade joined the basement smell of staleness, stagnant water. Behind them, slamming its doors in farewell, the train pulled away from the station, quickly disappearing into the black portal of the tunnel. And soon a thick veil of silence descended on the diggers along with the familiar pitch of darkness, hinting that it was time to remember the flashlights. How do we get back now? Karina asked in a depressed voice, hugging herself. The terrible vision on the train wouldn't leave her head. Sergei didn't miss the girl's pallor. He approached, put his hand on her shoulder and gently squeezed. Are you okay? Yes, she answered uncertainly, avoiding looking him in the eyes. I just want to make sure we can definitely get back without problems. Sergei frowned, feeling that Karina wasn't telling him everything, but didn't press. And he finally decided not to share his observations from the train with his friends. If the girl was already feeling uncomfortable at depth and in pitch darkness, then there was no point in multiplying her fears. Karina was afraid of being taken for crazy if she told about the shadow phantoms. After all, she might have just imagined it, but Timur wouldn't miss the opportunity to grumble at the fearful girl and mock her fantasies. We can always go back along the rails and find some kind of passage, Timur interjected, overhearing their conversation. Or wait for the train. Maybe it constantly shuttles back and forth here. But you're thinking about returning too early. The most interesting part is just beginning, because I see a passage ahead. I wonder where it leads? This news hardly pleased Karina. She hugged herself tighter, as if hoping to shield herself from the suffocating darkness of the subway. Timur and Sergei moved forward side by side, and very soon their lights illuminated a high arch carved in stone that crowned the passage. The echoing tunnel and cracked, dilapidated platform were left behind, and the trio stepped into a hall that had clearly once served as a full underground station. Here you could still notice among the moss growths and stone debris the remains of massive columns, cross vaults and side naves. But only dust and ashes remained of former grandeur. In silence the friends wandered around the station, among the desolation, everywhere running into nothing but rubble. The echo greedily caught their every step and sigh, carrying the prey into the darkness of corners and tearing it apart there, into separate unrecognizable sounds. Karina was the first to spot a narrow gap under a collapsed column, behind which was a passage. Sergei volunteered to go on reconnaissance, and soon the darting light of his flashlight was beyond visibility. Timur and Karina waited for their companion, trying not to look toward each other, but the growing tension could be felt in the air between them. What do you think? Why did they build this station here? The girl asked to defuse the situation. So deep underground, without an exit to the surface. How should I know? Timur responded reluctantly, crossing his arms on his chest. Apparently someone needed it. Maybe it's a path to a wartime bunker or somewhere similar. Why then did they let the station fall into such decay? Because people consign everything to oblivion, even what was once dear to them. After a couple seconds of silence, Karina suddenly asked, why do you and Sergei even like climbing around places like this, where everything has long since fallen into ruin? There's absolutely nothing here except dust and destruction. Doesn't it matter to you? Timur grumbled. Well, it's been our hobby since childhood. I just want to understand him better. Sighing heavily and resigning himself that his interlocutor wouldn't leave him alone until she got an answer, the guy tried to explain. Well, it's like seeing the city's underside with your own eyes. You get it. Something hidden from everyone, maybe even ugly, undeservedly forgotten, but at the same time constituting an integral part of the city. Because without this past stage, it's impossible to imagine everything that exists now. Something like that. Of course, Timur was being a bit disingenuous. For him, this wasn't the main reason. His love of digging had once grown from his love of quiet, deserted places where no one would look for him. No one like family. Sergei had simply understood and shared his desire to escape from the world, and later this had somehow naturally grown into their main passion in life. Exploring abandoned places and debunking various metro legends. But understanding still flashed for a moment in Karina's eyes, though she didn't have time to answer because Sergei's muffled call rang out. Climb up here. Successfully navigating the passage, Timur and Karina found themselves on a staircase worn by time, whose steps had crumbled almost beyond recognition. Sergei waited at the top, examining the corridor walls covered with deep snaking cracks and a film of moisture. How deep underground are we now? Sergei said thoughtfully when Timur overcame the climb and stood shoulder to shoulder with his friend. Tim, I really didn't think those catacombs could take us to such unexplored metro levels. This is just a find. I'm more interested in what we'll see next. The passages clearly lead somewhere else. After a few meters, the corridor swerved, its stone walls, losing all form, began to resemble melted ice cream. From somewhere came a whiff of hydrogen sulfide, like rotten eggs, and Karina wrinkled her nose in disgust. Finally, the road ended in a spacious hall with a rather low earthen ceiling hanging practically over their heads. If you stretched out your hand, you could easily touch it, but no one did. The ceiling was supported everywhere by crooked props and wooden beams, but judging by the clumps of earth underfoot, this wasn't a particularly successful solution. The soil was still caving in. The smell in the room was specific. Swampy foul, coming from moisture slowly seeping from the ceiling, settling on the walls as mineral deposits and collecting in separate murky puddles. At the far end of the underground hall, several wide openings could be seen, leading deeper into the catacomb labyrinths. I don't like it here. Karina couldn't help herself. She hesitated in place, not daring to step further, and something crunched loudly under her boot. At first she thought it was one of the small stalagmites found here on the floor. But when she looked down, the girl screamed. She had crushed the dirty yellow bones of a human foot. "Mommy!" Karina squealed in fright and began to tremble. Her gaze frantically darted around the floor, noticing more and more bone fragments. Here lay a toothless jaw. Nearby human ribs lay in an untidy heap, and beside them a shin bone stuck out from a pile of wet earth. Sergei rushed to the girl, trying to protect her from an invisible threat, and following Karina's gaze, immediately saw the bones underfoot. "Skeletons!" Timur flinched. He stood with his head thrown back, and the light of the helmet flashlight illuminated scraps of shroud and rotten bones protruding from the earth on the ceiling. At that very moment, quite close to Timur, a skull polished by time, like a newborn baby, fell from the womb of Mother Earth and crashed into a foul puddle, splashing the guy's legs with a wave of spray. Shit! He belatedly jumped back, but his black pants had already absorbed the stinking slime in which decomposed human remains had lain for years. What is this crap? Why do we have an underground cemetery above our heads? Damn it. Let's get out of here. Karina wailed in horror, dropping all pretense. No matter how hard she had tried the last hour to demonstrate courage, to prove to everyone that she was far from a pampered girl, and worthy of being with Sergei, sharing his extraordinary interests, now her nerves had finally given out. She had so hoped that Sergei wouldn't have to blush before his friends for his girlfriend. But if she had still considered the shadows on the train a hallucination, her brave soul simply couldn't endure quite tangible dead people. "Quiet!" Sergei raised his voice, extending his hands toward Karina. "Calm down. These are just old bones. Look closely, they crumble to dust at one touch." As proof, the guy stepped on the nearest pile of ribs, and they crackled into a heap of fragments. "I think Tim's right," he continued. "We're right under some very deep and ancient graveyard. Apparently these remains are hundreds of years old. The earth is gradually being washed away, so they fall out here, into the cavity. There's nothing scary about it." He spoke reasonable things in a calm voice, but Karina's fright was stronger. The girl shook her head in protest and hotly objected. "You think there's nothing scary about finding ourselves at the very bottom of a graveyard, under tons of earth and bones? When around us are only abandoned catacombs. We need to go back." Searching for a suitable answer that could calm the girl, Sergei thought for a couple of seconds, but Timur used the pause to needle Karina. "If you want to leave here so badly, then why don't you finally do it, each little coward?" "Tim!" Sergei roared. "You're at it again? I told you I wasn't going to listen to female hysterics and whining. Don't you dare talk like that." An ugly verbal fight broke out. Standing opposite each other and clenching their fists, the guys cursed foully, forgetting where they were and who lay around them. The echo caught their voices, screams reflected off the hall walls and carried far into the tangle of catacombs. Things were heading toward a fight. In powerless despair, Karina, standing at the entrance, watched this scene, fully realizing who exactly was to blame for everything. It was only because of her selfish desire that Sergei was forced, ignoring his friend's opinion, to take the girl underground. She had only wanted to rise higher in her boyfriend's eyes, earn the trust of his best friend by daring to go on an expedition. So that besides external beauty and grace, they would finally see courage and fortitude in her. But here she had become the cause of discord between two best friends, threatening to escalate into violence. And this in such a difficult situation, when they had climbed to some completely unthinkable depth of the subway, from where no one would pull them out if something happened. Besides, the guys clearly didn't want to return so quickly. And now they should all act together, as a team, but apparently only Karina with her emotions was preventing this. At least, she thought so. And therefore, gathering all her will into a fist, she said in a weak voice, "I'll go further." They didn't hear her, and the girl had to repeat louder, clenching her fists so hard that her nails dug into her palms. "I'll go further with you. And I won't complain and cry anymore. I promise. Just don't fight." Sergei, raising his eyebrows in surprise, turned to Karina, thinking he had misheard. Timur also fell silent mid-sentence and looked toward the girl. "Why did you decide that?" Sergei asked. "You're scared. I'm scared. So what? But we've already descended deep enough to turn back now. And it's clearly important to you to fully explore this place. Glad you realize that," Timur responded darkly, drilling his companion with an uncompromising gaze. "And splitting up is a bad option," Karina continued in an unsteady voice. "Who knows who might get lost? So I'll keep myself together and stay quiet the rest of the way." She made a motion with her hand as if locking her mouth and throwing away the key. Sergei was torn between unwillingness to accept this sacrifice and thirst to continue exploring the catacombs. He saw how hard this decision had been for the girl. How scared she really was. Sergei approached Karina, took her tender hands and squeezed them. "I'm with you. I'll be nearby. I think there's just a little more wandering left here. And then we'll return, get to the surface and smile as we remember all these fears. Right, little mouse? You believe me, don't you?" She nodded weakly and stretched her lips in a pitiful semblance of a smile. It came out unconvincing. "Well, if everything's decided, then let's move on," Timur ruthlessly interrupted them. "Enough languishing in this graveyard. We need to see where the galleries lead." He moved toward several openings visible in the far part of the room. The uneven holes led into darkness and emptiness, and Timur froze before them thoughtfully. Karina and Sergei approached their companion, and the light of 3 flashlights danced over the gaping stone maws. "Which path shall we choose?" Karina suddenly took a couple steps forward, stepping into the middle passage, and listened attentively to something. "What are you doing?" Sergei got nervous, jerking toward her. "What is that?" The girl whispered in amazement, craning her neck. Sergei and Timur turned their ears, and almost immediately they distinguished how somewhere far away enchanting voices began to sing. A quiet melody spread through the underground, filling its most secret caverns. "I've heard this before," Sergei immediately remembered. "It's the sirens. Those ones? From the legend?" Timur asked, adjusting his helmet. "Yes, sounds more like wind whistling somewhere. Let's go check it out." And shrugging his shoulders, Timur strode forward into the middle passage. Exchanging glances, Sergei and Karina followed him, but the girl lagged behind slightly, casting one last wary glance behind her, where the abandoned graveyard lay. And in the beam of her flashlight, dozens of human figures woven from shadows appeared again for a moment and immediately disappeared. Having gained a second life, they rose from the ashes that the wet earth spat out and silently stepped after the trio. Karina almost cried out but covered her mouth with her palm in time. She couldn't complain, get scared, or ask to go home. She had promised this to herself and her friends. She had to prove that she wasn't a burden, even if this place somehow affected her badly, causing hallucinations. Unwanted tears glistened in the girl's eyes, which she carefully wiped away with her sleeve in the darkness while no one was looking. And then she quickened her pace, trying to stay closer to Sergei, who had no idea about the visions tormenting his beloved. The gallery turned out to be quite short. The passage swerved a couple times and led the seekers into a room where walls and ceilings were lost in darkness. The light of helmet flashlights could barely illuminate huge, immense stalactites descending from somewhere above, and stalagmites stretching to meet them. The vast underground cave extended so far that echo irretrievably carried away any sounds, and only the siren song hung in the air like a shimmering mirage. But what turned out to be more exciting for the trio was seeing what the incredibly sized hall concealed at the bottom of a shallow depression in its very heart. There lay the ruins of an ancient city. Chapter 5, Procession of Kings and Corpses. They stepped onto the city streets, barely containing their trembling from the incredible discovery. The immense vaults of the underground cave pressed down on their heads with majesty, allowing them to fully savor the awareness of their own insignificance and smallness. Led by the mysterious singing of sirens, the friends walked along the worn cobblestone streets of the gray city, past crude stone buildings that had turned to ruins centuries ago. Somewhere only walls remained with uneven rectangular windows, somewhere the lower floors had partially survived with rotten wooden doors and shutters, and occasionally gloomy towers with flat roofs emerged from the darkness. "Incredible," Karina whispered reverently, surveying the remains of an unknown civilization with wide-open eyes. "A huge underground city. Now that's really a find," Timur drawled thoughtfully, scratching his closely cropped head under his helmet. "The last thing I expected to discover under the metro was a whole damn city next to a graveyard." Sergei veered to the side, deciding to peek inside one of the buildings. Despite the preserved roof and shutters, the house contained no furniture or traces of former residents. The floor was covered with a thick layer of dust and stone debris, and a sharp smell of unclear nature hung in the air, which didn't disappear but weakened when Sergei returned to the street. "So," Timur immediately asked with interest, "anything there?" "Nope, it's like no one ever lived here. Maybe no one really ever did live here." Karina seized on this thought. Who would want to sit in darkness and cold, especially so deep underground? "Well, this could have been temporary shelter," Sergei suggested, trying not to lose the thin guiding thread of inhuman siren voices that lured travelers to them through the labyrinth of streets and gateways. "I think I heard that in some countries in ancient times people dug underground cities and catacombs to hide from invaders, religious persecution, and similar threats. They waited out hard times in hiding, then returned to the surface." This answer apparently completely satisfied the girl, and she continued walking silently, only occasionally turning around and looking behind her for some reason. Sergei also turned around just in case, but never saw what was attracting Karina's attention. Timur walked through the dead streets, tormented by an unpleasant growing feeling of anxiety that had appeared in the graveyard and now relentlessly followed him. He almost physically sensed the presence of danger in the air, but couldn't explain to himself what exactly was bothering him, sharpening his instincts. Whether it was the deep blackness of doorways and window openings in the forgotten houses, or the voices of sirens, seductively frightening, which simply shouldn't have existed hundreds of meters underground. And it resembled the howling of wind less and less. Therefore, when the singing suddenly stopped abruptly, he couldn't help but exhale with relief. "They've gone quiet," Sergei said disappointedly, listening to the fading echo. "Maybe it's for the better," Timur responded. The echoes died away completely, but Timur was forced to admit to himself that his anxiety hadn't weakened at all, but on the contrary, had grown stronger. Because in the silence that hung over the city, he could now clearly distinguish small, insignificant sounds that filled this seemingly completely lifeless and abandoned city. Somewhere high above the trio's heads, under the vaults of the immense ceiling, the lightest flapping of wings could be heard. Timur immediately thought of bats that had found shelter in the dark, deeply hidden cave, but at the same time he distinguished another sound that was much closer, and seemed much more ominous to him. From the darkness of a neighboring street, separated from the guys by a line of ruined houses, came measured creaking and knocking. Karina and Sergei, busy with their whispering, noticed nothing, but Timur, slowing his pace, was all ears. He didn't want to believe it, but the sound most resembled the creaking of ungreased wheels of a wooden cart rolling with a clatter over the cobblestones. But where would a cart come from in the ruins of an ancient city? And who was pulling it? He was wondering whether he should bother his friends about this or go check everything out alone, when Sergei, suddenly interrupting his sweet conversation with Karina, frowned and approached the nearest house. "What is it?" the girl immediately asked with interest. On individual buildings in the city, like this one where wooden doors and window shutters were preserved, there were images of crosses applied with red paint. Sergei hadn't particularly paid attention to them from the moment they stepped onto the cobblestones, but now the wet shine caught his attention, and the guy uncertainly touched the cross. Strange. This paint is fresh, he muttered quietly, but his friends heard him. How is it? Fresh? Karina asked again, nervously grabbing the tip of her braid. Sergei didn't answer, smearing a scarlet drop of paint between his fingers. A light, elusive aroma of copper touched his nostrils, and to avoid scaring Karina even more, the guy quickly wiped his fingers on his sweater. He turned to the girl with a serene smile and answered, Just seemed that way. No, wait, Karina didn't believe him. You said the paint on the door was fresh. Timur wasn't just gripped by excitement and anxiety mixed into a single explosive cocktail. They overwhelmed him completely, exposing all his senses and nerves, directly screaming about danger. Guys, something's not right here, he began. But his voice was drowned out by a threatening rumble that, like a harbinger of approaching misfortune, suddenly spread over the entire city. Boom! Somewhere on the ceiling of the immense cave, flocks of bats took flight, cutting through the veil of darkness that bound the city with flapping and piercing squeaking. Near Sergei, Karina screamed in fright and immediately covered her mouth with her palm, swallowing evidence of her own cowardice, though none of her companions dared reproach her at that moment. Boom! For the second time, an unclear rolling rumble swept through the streets of the underground city, making the earth shake and echoes scatter through the ruins. What the hell is that? Timur exclaimed in a voice breathless with excitement, looking around. It's a bell, pale Sergei answered, pressing the trembling Karina to himself. Boom! For the third and final time, an alarm bell rang from one of the distant invisible towers, and at that same instant the streets of the dead city filled with a growing rustling. The soul-chilling sound spread between houses like a plague, swiftly and inevitably. It seemed the stones underfoot and timid shadows in the alleys were producing this rustle, but the real source was nowhere to be seen, until rats suddenly poured onto the cobblestones from all sides. A solid stream of gray backs marked with red crosses flickered. The rodents emerged by the hundreds from emptied houses, invisible cracks and voids. Gathering in packs, they soon merged into a single unstoppable avalanche and flooded the streets like a river overflowing its banks. And there was no escape from this element. Rats! Unable to contain her fear any longer, Karina shrieked hysterically, and her face was distorted by a grimace of disgust and helpless horror. There are rats everywhere! Pushing Sergei away with such force that he staggered, the girl ran away. Karina! Stop! Her boyfriend called out and ran after her, hoping to stop his beloved. But she didn't hear him, in a mad rush trying to leave this cursed place where the three of them had climbed for some incomprehensible reason. Deathly pale Timur immediately hurried after his friend, trying not to step on the gray bodies scurrying underfoot. What he saw and heard frightened him too, but the guy wasn't going to rush into the unknown like Karina, realizing that now it would be wiser to hide and wait out the rat invasion in shelter. Karina! Sergei shouted, breathless from running. Stop! Please! Stop! But the girl couldn't make her own legs stop, even if she had wanted to. Completely surrendering to instincts, she flew through the streets, diving into gateways and narrow passages, but everywhere black beads of rat eyes looked at her. Everywhere she was accompanied by strings of gray parasites with red crosses on their backs and dirty pink worm tails. How many times in these brief moments did she regret that because of her own stubbornness she had decided to go underground with Sergei and Timur? Countless times. Who and what was she trying to prove with her action? Timur didn't give a damn about her. Sergei loved her anyway. And she herself had only convinced herself that she didn't possess the fortitude she never tired of telling herself about. Timur was right. She was a pampered, weak girl who could only wear dresses and smile sweetly, not explore gloomy dungeons on equal terms with guys. Sometimes weakness doesn't hide any secret strength. Sometimes weakness is just weakness. Sergei felt that Karina was slipping away from him further and further. He was losing her in the stinking rat crowd and suffocating power of fear. And along with that, his confidence that he would protect his own girlfriend from any trouble was melting. He couldn't protect her from herself. The rats that filled the streets of the deserted city swarmed underfoot, desperately squeaking and trying to bite when you accidentally stepped on their tails. Sergei frankly didn't understand where so many of them came from, but soon his thoughts were taken over by another phenomenon. The movement of rat currents changed, rushing in one direction. They seemed to be drawn to something still invisible, striving to merge into a single swarm. Sergei saw before Karina what was absorbing more and more rat bodies. What Karina was mindlessly running toward, seeing nothing through the veil of tears. Down the wide cobblestone avenue, a distorted, terrifying likeness of a funeral cortege was racing toward the girl with the clatter of wheels. Rat kings, a living mess of fur and tangled tails, bound with straps, dragged behind them an old creaking cart filled with corpses. Human bodies wrapped in tattered shrouds and tightly bound with tourniquets lay in the cart in an untidy heap. Ordinary rats, like a mighty current, caught up the procession of kings and corpses and carried it forward with incredible speed. And more parasites joined the procession, forming a living, surging sea of rats. "Stop!" Sergei screamed at the limit of his abilities, but it was all in vain. Karina noticed the threat only at the very last moment when, stumbling over rats, she crashed onto the stones and, raising her head, saw with horror this unthinkable creation of chaos before her. Her piercing shriek tore the air, immediately drowning in the rat fuss and squeaking. And then the gray furry ocean overwhelmed the girl who hadn't managed to get to her feet, burying her beneath it. The thin figure in the purple windbreaker dissolved without a trace in the quicksand bog of rats. "No, Karina!" Sergei roared, his voice breaking, intending to immediately throw himself into the disgusting pile reeking of droppings and rescue his beloved at any cost. Even if he would have had to break through the small, warm bodies of rodents with nails and teeth. Someone's strong hand intercepted him, squeezed his forearm until it bruised and pulled him into the darkness of the nearest half-ruined house. Timur pushed his desperately resisting friend against the wall, at which Sergei snarled angrily and tried to break through to the exit. "What are you doing? Let me go. I have to help her." His eyes, clouded with rage and despair, saw nothing before them except the horror-distorted face of his beloved in the last moment before she drowned in the gray abyss of vermin, choking on tears. "Those rats devoured her, and if you run there, then they'll devour you too," Timur shouted, shaking his friend by the shoulders. The appeal to the voice of reason failed. Sergei didn't stop trying to push his friend away and run out into the street. He pushed desperately, not noticing how he left bruises and scratches on his companion's skin. "I have to save Karina. I have to." "Calm down, you idiot, or the creatures will take us both. We need to wait until they leave." Timur delivered a strong, sobering slap to his friend, but this hardly helped, only gave Sergei even more incentive to fight and resist. He grabbed Timur, trying either to strangle him or move him from his place, but this was equivalent to pushing a rock. Meanwhile, quite close to their shelter, the deadly procession raced down the street, accompanied by the creaking of the cart, rat squeaking and the rustle of hundreds of tails. Through the window opening, Timur glimpsed the flickering light of Karina's flashlight, which darted through the crowd of gray rodents like a lighthouse beam over sea waves. The rats were dragging the girl with them, and occasionally her pitiful howl could be distinguished in the general noise. Sergei heard it too. "She's still alive. They didn't devour her. Let me go." He jerked with such force that Timur was thrown back against the debris, but he still held his friend, feeling a dull aching pain in his neck from the collision with stones. "Think with your head. What will you do alone against a crowd of beasts?" "I don't care. I won't leave her." The procession of kings and corpses disappeared from view, turning from the avenue onto a neighboring street. The clatter of the cart and the clicking of rat claws on stones gradually began to fade, getting lost in the tangle of echoing gateways. Fearing that he would lose the kidnappers, Sergei twisted in Timur's bear hug and finally broke free, leaving his backpack and a piece of fleece sweater in his friend's hands. Gasping, he immediately rushed in pursuit, shouting the girl's name like a madman. Swearing foully, Timur jumped to his feet and followed his friend. Identical streets flashed before Sergei, replacing each other. He ran, and the flashlight beam on his helmet jumped over the ruined walls of houses and uneven cobblestones. The tail of the sinister procession appeared for just a moment from a narrow alley, and the guy rushed after it without thinking. The rats rustled barely audibly somewhere ahead, but the darkness that had engulfed the city didn't allow him to make out their gray bodies with red plague crosses on their backs. Sergei ran more by smell, following the wave of disgusting animal stench. At some point, the sounds of the cart finally dissolved in the silence of the dead city, and the guy was afraid that he had irretrievably lost the already weak trail. Continuing to rely on his sense of smell, he soon unexpectedly found himself in open space. Before him spread a square framed by the broken teeth of ancient buildings, in the middle of which a vast chasm gaped in the earth. Once a huge piece of cobblestone had collapsed, forming a steep descent into the hidden depths of the underground. There was no need to guess where the rats had gone. From the abyss came stagnant stench mixed with the sharp stink of rat droppings and urine. Sergei crept to the very edge and looked down in feverish excitement to where the sloping stone fragment of the square led. If you went down into the pit, it was almost impossible to climb back up, unless you possessed rat-like agility. The voice of breathless Timur caught up with the guy when he had almost taken a step forward. "Don't be stupid, Sergei. Karina is lost. With bare hands you won't save her from a rat den." Timur was quickly approaching from around the corner with 2 backpacks on his back. He looked beaten and exhausted, but his eyes burned with grim determination. "But you and I can still get out alive. We can get the hell out of here right now, abandoning these damn catacombs. This expedition wasn't supposed to turn into such shit. Graveyard, sirens, and a whole fucking city of rats. To hell with it all. I've had enough. We need to get out." "Get out?" Sergei went crazy, turning on his heels to his companion. Chestnut hair wet with sweat clung to his pale face like seaweed. His sweater had a gaping hole. But the guy didn't care how he looked at that moment. "If you hadn't tried to stop me, I would have helped Karina right away, driven those creatures away from her. But you made me cower behind walls and watch as rats dragged her away. I was sure she was already done for. And I was trying to save you." "They would have dragged away anyone who got in their way." Timur choked with anger. Suddenly all the clarity of his motives dimmed before him like a burned-out light bulb, because his best friend was blaming him for literally not letting him get himself killed. "But she's alive, and in the end, because of you I wasted precious time and I'm wasting it now." Sergei spat, turning toward the chasm in the earth. "You can get out, but I'm going after her. I promised her that I would always be near and would protect her. I promised that she would have nothing to fear." With these words, Sergei stepped into the darkness of the breach and rapidly slid down the slope leading into pitch darkness. Timur barely restrained a cry of despair ready to tear from his lips. He covered his face with his hands, not wanting to believe in everything that had happened, but when he took his palms away, reality still stood before him in its disgusting guise. In childhood and youth, Sergei had been the one who constantly pulled Timur out of trouble. It seemed the time had come for them to switch roles. "I'm coming with you," he decided, wheezing, and then, tearing from his place, rushed to the abyss, shouting at the top of his lungs, "You idiot, I'm coming with you." Chapter 6, Gifts for the Queen. Moving his legs quickly to avoid tumbling head over heels down, Timur ran down the stone slope. At the end, balance still failed him, and the guy slid the last meters on his knees, wearing through the fabric of his pants and scraping the skin of his palms. He landed on a pile of prickly small twigs covering the floor. Sergei stood nearby, examining the passages dug by rats underground, wide enough for not only a person but an entire cart to pass through. Leaning on his aching palms, Timur got up, dusted himself off, and finally got a better look at what the floor under his feet was actually covered with. These turned out to be not twigs at all. Thousands of rat skeletons, decomposed and mummified bodies with remains of gray and black fur, lay on the ground. "Damn," Timur spat. "Where did so many of these tailed creatures come from? There's nothing to eat here. Just stones all around." Sergei, incredibly serious and gloomy, took his backpack from his friend and pointed to the cart rut pressed into the earth and pile of rat remains. "Apparently they eat any carrion they find here," he said, "including dragging bones from the graveyard. Haven't you wondered who could have harnessed rats to a cart here at all? Apparently the same one who left bloody crosses on houses and rang the bell. Someone else lives here." The friends exchanged anxious glances and hurried where the rut led, trying to step more quietly on the crunchy carpet of bones. They found themselves under the earthen vaults of a burrow dug and trampled by thousands of rodents. Sergei was in a hurry, but didn't forget about caution, dimming the light of his helmet flashlight and picking up the first stone he came across from the floor. Though this unserious weapon would hardly help him defend against hordes of hungry rats. Timur felt his friend's excitement as well as his own. He had managed to regret the harsh words said in a moment of fear. Of course, he shouldn't have suggested his friend abandon his girlfriend to fate. That wasn't very manly, and quite obviously had turned Sergei against his companion. On the other hand, how could they help her? They had originally gone underground unarmed, not counting small penknives, but penknives posed no threat to a rat pack of that size. Rubbing his temples under his helmet, Timur mentally cursed Karina. As he had supposed, the girl had indeed caused them problems, turning the expedition into who knows what. First her anxieties and hysterics out of nowhere, then complete madness. What the devil made her rush straight toward the rats instead of taking shelter in the nearest ruins? Had panic really clouded her mind that much? And Sergei was the same way, rushed headlong toward death. Several rats ran past the diggers and, going around the light of their flashlights, disappeared into the nearest tunnel branch. From somewhere came a whiff of flesh rotting alive, instantly overpowering the smell of excrement that hung in the underground. Timur wrinkled his nose, covering it with his sleeve. Sergei coughed and wiped the tears that appeared in the corners of his eyes. Apparently the stench was coming from exactly where the cartwheel tracks led. The source of the monstrous stench lay deep in the burrow, and the farther the friends went, the harder it became to breathe, and spasms twisted their stomachs. Disgusting, Sergei whispered, trying not to breathe air through his nose. Timur behind his shoulder answered with an agreeing mumble. More and more rats began to appear around them. Black and gray shadows flickered underfoot, and the beads of their eyes glimmered like stars in the night sky. They looked at the strangers with distrust, trying to keep their distance. And almost each one was dragging something in its teeth. A bone fragment, a dead bug, or a root stained with earth. Looks like we're going straight to their food storage, Timur said in a lowered voice. He didn't know much about rat habits, so could only assume this. How great was his disgust and confusion when the passages led him and his friend to the wormy heart of the rat burrow, where the air rang with the flies that filled it. The tunnel ended at a narrow ledge, from which a sloping earthen descent led to the side. It led down into a spacious dugout chamber of oval shape, and it was exactly there that rats hurried in thin streams, carrying prey in their teeth. The ceiling and walls of the underground cave held only thanks to tangled roots that had formed a reliable network. At the bottom of the pit, something huge darkened, and alive. Sergei heard the hoarse, heavy breathing of the creature, the stench of its body and the grinding of teeth, but the muffled light of his flashlight couldn't illuminate in detail what the cave concealed at such a distance. I don't see traces of the cart or Karina here, Timur said quietly. Down on the left side there are other tunnels. The rut leads there, but first we need to go down and get around that creature that sprawled in the middle. What is that thing anyway? Sergei silently began to creep down the earthen embankment, trying to keep to the wall. The rat scurrying at his feet increased, and the guy, swallowing, looked more closely at the stream of rodents clearly striving to the bottom of the pit, to the unknown monster that had settled there. Timur followed his friend like a shadow, dimming his flashlight to minimum to only distinguish the road underfoot. Their appearance didn't go unnoticed. The creature in the center stirred, giving birth to a wave of suffocating stench and frequently chattering its teeth, carefully grinding something. The sound was like the grinding of a multi-ton industrial shredder. Having descended, the guys carefully, one small step at a time, moved toward the passage where, judging by the traces on the ground, rats had dragged the cart in their poor companion. Timur carefully watched what he was stepping on, and all sorts of things lay on the pit floor, from pieces of wood and bones brought by rodents to mangled, undecomposed rat bodies. Who were they feeding? His friend asked Sergei almost inaudibly, gripping his shoulder tightly. His companion didn't answer, looking where swarms of flies and rats seethed in the darkness, where the monster they guarded sat. Raising a trembling hand, he slowly increased the brightness of his helmet flashlight. The spot of light expanded, inexorably filling almost half the burrow with itself. And in this shining white-yellow halo, first piles of rat corpses riddled with larvae covering the chamber floor became clearly visible, then the one who reclined on them. Curled up and wrapped in her scab-covered tail, from the darkness of the pit a female rat of incredible size looked at the strangers with the white films of blind eyes. Her body, disfigured by pockmarks and purulent abscesses, plastered with lichen patches of fur, exceeded the bodies of her relatives dozens of times. Swollen, sickly paws couldn't support the creature's weight, and the rat could only lie there, opening her maw with yellow blades of incisors, from which spread an intoxicating smell of carrion and entrails rotting alive. Small rats streamed in lines into the gaping maw, leaving edible gifts on the tongue and quickly slipping out before the trap of the mouth snapped shut. Some were less lucky than others, and they became part of the treat when the queen closed her jaws and crunched everything that got in there. and it seemed the bodies of her relatives tasted much better to her than the garbage they brought. "Don't believe in mutant rats living in the metro after this," Timur joked nervously. The bright light obviously didn't please the rat pack and their majestic queen lying on a throne of subjects' corpses. The huge rat carcass stirred, sniffed noisily, and a piercing squeak suddenly burst from her maw along with scraps of flesh and sprays of pus. Despite her blindness, she distinguished light and darkness wonderfully, and she very much disliked that unbearable burning radiance had penetrated her secret abode. The small rats bustled about, listening to their mistress's command, and Sergei somehow immediately understood that this boded nothing good for him and his companion. "Let's get out of here," he said rapidly, and was the first to rush toward the passage, which was just a short distance away. Timur didn't lag behind, lifting his legs high when gray parasites began to dart along them, clinging with their claws to his pants. The guy mercilessly shook them off and even crushed a couple, but this didn't frighten the pursuers at all. Diving into another passage dug in the earth by the pack's effort, Sergei and Timur rushed where the rut imprinted in the soil led them. Behind them came threatening rat squeaks, rapidly catching up with the strangers who had dared to penetrate their domain. "How do we escape from them?" Timur shouted breathlessly. Sergei heard him, turned for a moment, illuminating the corridor behind with his flashlight beam, and threw the stone he had been carrying all this time. Of course, the wave of gray bodies swallowed the stone without even noticing it. "I don't know. They'll easily catch us if we don't get out of the burrows." This was clear without words. Only the passages kept winding, showing no signs of ending, and the rat pack was only getting closer. In desperation, Timur took his helmet off his head, turned the flashlight to full power, and quickly placed the headgear on the ground so that the beam was directed precisely at the pursuers. The rats, accustomed to the darkness of the underground, were blinded for several seconds, slowed down, colliding with each other and afraid to approach the source of bright, eye-cutting light, and this gave the friends the desired head start. "This way," Sergei shouted and dragged Timur into a chamber with a low ceiling from which moisture constantly dripped. They crossed it, crouching and slipping on the sodden clay soil, to finally break out into an extensive damp cave. Deep silence and serenity met the travelers with the black waters of underground lakes. Chapter 7. Gold of the Deep Lakes. Under the low vaults of the cave, bristling with limestone growths, the basins of underground lakes darkened like shapeless ink blots. Separated by isthmuses of clay sandy soil and sharp ridges of stalagmites, the deep waters stretched far in all directions, and the boundaries of the cave were lost in the gloom. "Where to now?" Timur asked, taking advantage of the brief respite. The shore they and Sergei had burst onto wasn't very wide. Hiding from rats on it, among clusters of mineral icicles, seemed like a doomed idea from the start, but there was nowhere else to run. Walls pressed in from the sides, and ahead stretched endless tarry lakes of unknown depth. Sergei looked down at his feet, making sure that cart tracks were present here. Quite fresh, clearly visible on the clay soil. Judging by them, the cart had passed further without any problems, following the narrow land bridges that separated the bodies of water. A network of long shallows stretched the entire length of the lakes, and if a loaded cart had calmly navigated this path, then the trail could quite well support 2 people. "Let's go along the shallows," Sergei declared in a tone that brooked no objection. "And where will that lead us?" "There's nothing but water visible out there. The cart went that way, which means there's something there." The rats clearly knew the road to the far shore. But what if the rats chasing us also know the road? Timur thought to himself, but didn't argue, since no other option for salvation was foreseen in the next few seconds. They needed to immediately disappear from the shore, because rat scurrying could already be heard behind them. Stepping onto the strip of land connected to the shore, Sergei was the first to hurry along the unstable path. His rubber boots slipped on clay, got stuck in moisture-saturated sand, but the soil calmly supported human weight without crumbling underfoot. Having lost his flashlight, Timur was forced to go second, constantly nervously looking back. Though without light it was practically impossible to make out anything behind him. "Think they'll follow us?" Timur asked his friend. Sergei bit his lip, thinking for the first time about the possibility of such an outcome. Carefully turning around, he peered from behind his companion's shoulder to illuminate the shore they had left behind with his flashlight. The shore turned out to be so densely covered with rats that there was no room for a grain to fall. The rodents were in constant motion, running from place to place, climbing over neighbors and getting close to the waterline, but not crossing it. Individual pack members risked running onto the isthmus, but after sniffing around, soon retreated to land. Looks like they don't like water. Sergei rejoiced. So we're safe here. They won't risk going into water or onto the shallows. But why then did the rats pulling the cart pass through here? Timur immediately became alert, looking around. The contradictory behavior of the animals seemed suspicious to him. Meanwhile, Sergei, relieved to leave worries about rats behind, threw himself forward with new strength along the strip of land, skirting basins of black water. He was eager to catch up with the cart, which should clearly appear on the edge of visibility any moment now. Timur kept up, entrusting his friend with the honor of being Pathfinder and worries about choosing the route. He himself was preoccupied with sounds arising in the karst cave, its cavities and voids. As soon as the animal rustling and squeaking behind them became indistinguishable, natural underground sounds came to the foreground. The melody of falling drops, the distant rumble of groundwater, and quiet splashing, as if fish were playing somewhere nearby. They had moved far enough from shore when Timur noticed that his boots were being sucked in more strongly. If before he had stepped relatively easily, now his feet sank almost to the ankles, and pulling them from the sand was becoming a tiring task. Having once again yanked his foot from the quagmire, Timur heard a distinct and ominous splash beneath him. "Sergei," he called to his friend, his suddenly parched tongue barely moving. "The water's rising." Illuminating the shallows under his feet, Sergei gasped, convinced that his companion was right. Slowly and inexorably, water was rising in the underground lakes. If before the path had been clearly visible, now it was covered by a shining surface, and with each moment the soil went deeper. "Shit!" Sergei succinctly described the situation and did the only thing left to them: ran. Though his chest and calves still ached from the recent chase. And here again, to survive, they had to overcome fatigue and race into the unknown, urging each other on. "Faster! Faster!" Timur urged, stepping on his friend's heels. "I'm running, but I can't see the other shore." There wasn't a single patch of land left around that they could climb onto. The thin web of shallows had disappeared, swallowed by the rising impenetrably black water, and only sharp peaks of stalagmites peeked above the surface like teeth of chthonic underwater creatures. "To the rocks!" Timur shouted, pushing his friend toward the nearest ridge of stalagmites, tall and thick enough to climb on. Sergei obeyed, turning from the no longer visible path toward the mineral growths, and immediately sank waist-deep into water. Timur slid after him, plunging into the depths of the underground lake. They reached the saving stones in a couple of strokes, afraid to step on the unreliable bottom. Sergei was first to climb onto the slippery stalagmites and immediately extended his hand to Timur, helping him get out of the icy water. That's why the rats didn't venture onto the shallows. Timur shared his thoughts, chattering his teeth from cold. With whitened fingers, he frantically gripped the limestone icicles, trying to squeeze more comfortably between them so as not to slip into the lake. Apparently they sensed that water would soon start rising. Sergei agreed, settling on the sloping base of a huge stalagmite. The friends peered anxiously into the blackness that had flooded the entire cave. Now moisture was everywhere. Nothing remained on the surface except the tallest mineral blocks. "Think the water will rise even higher?" Timur asked. "Seems to have stopped." Sergei carefully watched the level. "Only we can't sit here God knows how long waiting for the water to go down again. The cart tracks are washed away, but we still need to reach the opposite shore." Timur wanted to twirl his finger at his temple, but was afraid to let go with his hand. "Are you suggesting we swim there?" "Just to the next group of rocks. Look," Sergei stretched out his arm, pointing to stalagmites several meters from them. "We'll take a break there and scout what lies further." Without waiting for his friend's answer, he gently slid from the base of the block into the water, wincing from the cold that gripped his body. To avoid being left alone in the darkness, Timur was forced to swim after him, mentally cursing everything in the world. The unexpected bathing in an underground lake threatened at minimum soaked clothes, shoes, and backpacks. Continuing the journey in such conditions would be unwise, but given Sergei's irresistible desire to save Karina, there was no point talking about the wisdom of actions. Rowing under the weight of his own moisture-saturated clothing turned out to be too heavy. Especially for Timur, since with such a load his neck, injured in the fight with Sergei, began to hurt, and all the small scrapes and bruises collected in the last hour of wandering through city ruins and rat burrows started aching. Finally, not quite reaching the new ridge of stalagmites, the guy shed his rubber boots underwater. It became much easier. Drop your shoes, he advised Sergei, who was also visibly struggling to stay on the surface, constantly swallowing water. The sacrifice was huge, but to cope with the elements here and now, it had to be made. Following the advice, Sergei quickly swam to the rocks and immediately helped his friend. The next island of mineral deposits turned out to be located not so close. They would have to swim at least 10 meters to it without stops, but Sergei said he could see something in the distance that looked like shore. Not really sure, but from those rocks it'll definitely be clear whether it's an edge or not. Allowing themselves to rest only half a minute, they again stepped into the icy depths of the reservoir. Clenching his chattering teeth, Timur swam and prayed that his legs wouldn't cramp. Otherwise there would be no hope of reaching land. The elements would drag the limp body to the depths that very moment. The light of Sergei's flashlight, the only bright spot in the cave, became a beacon for Timur. He swam following the radiance like a ship lost in a storm, and trusted this guiding ray. And eyes accustomed to darkness didn't want to notice other gleams that arose underwater. At some point, Timur accidentally felt a shallow area with his foot and stopped there, chest deep in water, to catch his breath. Only then did his attention finally catch the golden reflections in the depths. He looked into the abyss in puzzlement, blinked a couple times, not believing his own eyes. But the vision didn't disappear. There, below, lay round golden coins emitting a dim light. 1, 2, 3, more than a dozen. Timur swallowed, forgetting about the cold for a moment, and thought about the scattering of treasures that could be hidden at the bottom of the underground lakes. After all, an ancient city was located nearby, and groundwater could quite well have brought old gold from somewhere. Timur reached to pick up one of the coins, submerging himself to his very nose. At first he thought water refraction had deceived him, then suddenly realized that money shouldn't emit any glow. But it was already too late. He felt something elastic and fleshy, and two round coin-like objects suddenly shifted to the side by themselves. "Eyes!" Timur exclaimed, blowing bubbles, when the underwater creature grabbed his arm and pulled him down. There, in the inky darkness of the depths, even with his eyelids open, he couldn't see anything, but felt that the being that had captured his wrist possessed slippery fish skin and sharp claws. The guy twisted underwater and kicked the unknown opponent with his foot. Surprisingly, he managed to break free, and Timur, flailing his arms, burst to the surface, greedily gulping air. "Timur!" Sergei yelled at him, having managed to climb onto a group of stalagmites. Noticing that his companion had surfaced nearby, Sergei jumped into the water and helped him swim to the saving island, pulling him up. "What happened?" "There's someone there," Timur squeezed out, gasping and shaking with horror. "There's someone underwater." Sergei paled at these words and looked around like a hunted animal. A loud splash sounded nearby. Who made it wasn't visible. The sound repeated a couple seconds later near a neighboring ridge of rocks. Someone or something was circling around the guys, now surfacing, now going underwater again. "Are you sure it wasn't a fish? Do fish have clawed hands, in your opinion?" In the far part of the cave came a series of splashes, as if an entire school of fish was playing. And after several tormenting moments filled with frightening silence, a familiar long mournful song suddenly spread over the lake surface. "Sirens!" Sergei exclaimed, trying to illuminate with his flashlight beam where the sound was coming from. But the mysterious singing, thanks to echo, sounded simultaneously from everywhere and nowhere. The stirring melody, too beautiful to ever be forgotten once heard, swept under the cave vaults, rushing into the distance, through rat burrows and streets of the plague city, through the old graveyard and abandoned metro station, along tunnel passages and winding catacomb galleries, to the surface, to people. It lured them to descend deep into the earth's bowels and behold the secrets hidden there, or become food for sirens. "Don't listen," Sergei chided his friend. "Looks like these are local underwater inhabitants, and they're clearly not just exercising their vocal cords. They'll drag us underwater and devour us," whispered Timur, white as chalk. "From here I can already see shore. There's an exit. We just need to cross the last lake." He pointed to the black serene surface that separated them from solid ground. "We won't make it, and in water we're helpless, easy prey. If we don't try, then we'll definitely become prey. They'll drag us off the rocks and drown us. And while they're busy singing, there's a chance we'll manage to reach shore. And there's a chance we won't. Damn it, Sergei. I never thought I'd die from some mythical sirens 100 meters underground." Stop whining, his partner suddenly roared, grabbing him by the collar of his sweatshirt. You've been accusing Karina of whining and being afraid this whole time, and now you've gone limp yourself. How are you better than her? You beat your chest and kept saying you were an experienced digger, that you weren't afraid of anything, that this was an easy walk for you, and now you've shit yourself and are ready to give up. The reproach echoed with pain in Timur's heart, probably because it was the purest truth. He pressed his lips together, detaching Sergei's fingers from his clothes, and looked joylessly into the black pool at his feet. He had to decide. Well, if we get out of this mess alive, looks like I'll have to seriously apologize to your girlfriend, brother. With these words, he held his breath and stepped into the lake. Dark waters closed over his head like wings of a starless night. The singing stopped the moment the guys found themselves in water. With a splash, the golden-eyed inhabitants of the lakes went to the depths to hunt their victims to their heart's content. Swim! Swim! Sergei shouted, spitting out water, to Timur swimming ahead. But he was already trying at the limit of his strength and abilities. In the darting light of Sergei's flashlight, the rapidly approaching strip of shore could be clearly seen, but when Timur had already hoped they were lucky to pass the sirens, the light suddenly went out. Turning in the darkness, the guy managed to notice only how a white-yellow spot of light sank into the depths, and blurred shadows rushed about at its border. The sirens had dragged Sergei underwater, and he thrashed furiously, trying to break free from the steel grip of their paws. Timur filled his lungs with air and dove, swimming with powerful strokes toward his friend surrounded by creatures. He grabbed his elbow and pulled upward, but the sirens instantly switched to the new victim, clinging from behind. Something resembling a strong fishtail brushed Timur's legs, and he immediately kicked, pushing away the threat. But they continued to confidently and roughly drag him to the bottom. As soon as Timur realized the sirens were pulling him by his backpack, he freed himself from the straps without thinking and rushed to the surface, feeling his lungs burn with fire. Above, a meter from him, Sergei thrashed, trying to throw off the creature that had climbed onto his shoulders. The silhouette, covered with blue-silver scales and transparent fringe of fins, desperately tore at his clothes and backpack with claws, until the guy did as his companion had, getting rid of the ballast. Swimming immediately became 100 times easier, and the siren, busy with the backpack that had fallen into her hands, gave Sergei several precious seconds, which were just enough to reach the shallows where he could stand firmly on his feet. Timur caught up with him, cutting through the water with powerful strokes. The sensation of soil under his feet instantly rid him of fatigue and pain in every cell of his body, especially where long claws of lake inhabitants had scratched his skin through his clothes. When the guys crawled onto shore, coughing and spitting out water, behind them sirens wailed disappointedly, singing raggedly in different voices, but constantly breaking off to go to the depths and soon return again. Before looking back and seeing the golden circles of eyes floating in thick darkness above the very surface of the water, Timur crawled to a safe distance deep into the shore. And the sight was still ominous. He tried not to think about how he and his friend and Karina would get back across this cave, unless they waited for low tide until victory before stepping onto siren territory even once more. Sergei, who had miraculously preserved his helmet with flashlight, was noisily blowing his nose nearby, casually examining his sweater torn to shreds. No belongings remained now except soaked and holey clothes, but the friends had at least preserved their own lives. Think we'll be able to get out of here? Timur asked hopelessly, turning away from the lake. I think we have no choice, Sergei responded in the same tone. After just a few seconds, he was already on his feet. Can't sit still. I see wheel prints there. We need to keep going. Chapter 8. The Worm's Labyrinth. After wringing out their clothes as best they could and slipping back into the miserably cold, damp gear, the guys hurried to follow the trail. It led straight to a perfectly round entrance into a new network of catacombs. The second Sergei stepped into the smooth-walled tunnels, his heart sank. The stone floor showed no signs of tracks, no wheel marks from the cart, no smudges, nothing. And when he and Timur ventured deeper, his spirits plummeted further. The galleries were a chaotic mess of identical passages and forks, twisting into a maddening maze. These walls are so smooth, Timur remarked, running his hand along the perfectly round tunnels, like they were carved out for a subway line. Feels like a machine bored these. We're gonna get lost in here so fast, Sergei groaned. Frustrated, Wish I hadn't left the chalk in my backpack. He picked up a shard of rock and tried scratching an arrow on the wall. The mark was barely visible. Annoyed, he chucked the stone away. They pressed deeper into the labyrinth, eyes glued to the floor for any hint of the cart or Karina, who'd been dragged off by those damn rats. They tried to be methodical, leaving scraps of Sergei's sweater as markers at each turn. But it didn't take long before they were hopelessly turned around. When they tried backtracking, they only got more tangled in the web of identical tunnels. Weirdly, none of their markers were anywhere to be found. It felt like these mysterious passages, slicing through the rock in every direction, went on forever. Sergei and Timur wandered the echoing tunnels, hunting for any sign of a trail or an exit, but with every step, hope slipped further away. They'd lost all sense of time, but judging by their aching bodies and growling stomachs, they'd been down here at least 3 hours since they first entered the subway. "God damn it," Sergei shouted, slamming his fist into the wall as they hit yet another intersection with 6 identical tunnels branching off. "Every second we waste could be Karina's last. How long have we been wandering? Half an hour? An hour?" Timur stayed quiet, too busy battling his own misery. He was shivering from the cold, and the pain in his neck, probably from that icy dip earlier, had flared up bad. The bruise throbbed so much he could barely hold his head up. The sting of his smaller cuts was nothing compared to this relentless ache that muddled his thoughts. "Karina!" Sergei yelled, his voice bouncing endlessly through the tunnels. No answer came back. "Let's take a breather," Timur mumbled. Sergei swung around, accidentally blinding Timur with his flashlight. He scanned his friend's trembling frame, noting how Timur clutched his neck. Sergei himself barely registered the cold, the exhaustion, or the bloody scratches covering his skin. Until he found Karina. He wouldn't let himself care about minor stuff like that. "Fine, but not for long," he said after a pause. Timur slid down the curved tunnel wall to the stone floor. Sergei crouched beside him, lazily scratching his bare chest. His fleece sweater was long gone, torn into scraps for markers that hadn't done jack. "Remember that time in 9th grade when we snuck onto that abandoned construction site at night to drink beer?" Timur said out of nowhere. "You mean the old hospital? Yeah, we found that entrance to the basements and started wandering around, singing at the top of our lungs, chugging beers. Those basements were massive, and we got totally lost within, like, half an hour. You kept swearing you knew where we went wrong, and I was convinced we were just going in circles. We stumbled around like idiots until that homeless guy heard our drunken singing and let us out." "Yeah, good times," Sergei chuckled, a flicker of warmth from those old memories briefly thawing the icy dread in his chest over Karina's disappearance. "Too bad there's no homeless hero showing up to guide us out of this maze." "Huh? Where'd that carefree teenage vibe go?" Sergei didn't answer right away. After a beat, he said, "We'll get out of here. And I don't just mean this labyrinth. I mean this whole damn subway mess. You know what Karina always says? No matter how endless despair feels, hope's always shining above it like a guiding star. Just don't forget to look up sometimes." Timur tilted his head back, as if a star might actually appear on the tunnel ceiling, then winced, grabbing his neck as pain shot through it. "You really believe that?" Timur asked, his voice heavy with doubt. "I'm not so sure anymore. Who'd have thought that old urban legend about the subway was true? And way darker than any story we heard. A dead city, hordes of rats, lake monsters. We've been all over the place for the last 10 years, chasing every metro myth out there, and we've never seen anything like this. And now all these secrets we've uncovered, they're going to stay buried down here with us, because there's no way forward or back." Sergei felt the wave of hopelessness radiating off his friend. Sure, things looked grim, but as long as they could still walk, talk of giving up seemed premature. "You're getting all mopey again," Sergei said. "Just tired and feeling like crap," Timur replied with a sad smile, rubbing his hands to warm them. "If you think about it, no one's even going to look for me if I disappear down here. Nobody knows I'm here." "Nobody?" Sergei raised an eyebrow. "Nope. Haven't talked to my parents since you helped me move into the dorm. Heard my dad's in the hospital now, and mom's on another bender because of it. My relatives keep trying to guilt trip me, saying I abandoned my helpless parents." Timur clenched his jaw, the white scar on his cheek, a gift from his dad years ago, standing out starkly. "So yeah, I didn't tell anyone about this trip except you. And now you're stuck here with me," he finished quietly. "You're giving up too soon," Sergei said. trying to lift his spirits. We're getting out of here. All three of us. You'll see. We'll be toasting to this whole mess at me and Karina's wedding. Sergei bit his tongue, but it was too late. Your wedding with Karina? What? Timur's eyes went wide, staring at him in shock. You proposed? When? I haven't yet, Sergei admitted, hesitating. Bought the ring a couple weeks ago. Was going to take her to dinner tomorrow and pop the question. You bought a ring 2 weeks ago, planned it all out, and didn't tell me. Timur sounded genuinely hurt. I didn't tell anyone, not even my parents. Wanted to wait for her answer first. Timur nodded, but the sting was clear. He thought Sergei would have made an exception for his best friend. Apparently not. They used to share everything. What's with the attitude? Sergei said, sensing the tension. I would have told you after she said yes. Before Timur could respond, the tunnel floor vibrated with a strange rumble. A deep, roaring hum echoed through the maze, getting louder fast. Both guys were on their feet in a flash. What the hell is that? Sergei whispered. Doesn't sound like rats, Timur replied, stepping toward the intersection. Where's it coming from? We should hide, just in case. But where? No matter how hard they listened, they couldn't pinpoint the source. The trembling shook the whole catacomb network, and the distorted echoes bounced around, messing with their senses. It sounded like a train barreling through the tunnel, except that made no sense. It's close, Sergei started, but before he could finish, a massive, dark gray, segmented creature burst from a nearby passage. Its countless short legs filled the tunnel as it moved with terrifying speed. A chitinous shield capped its blunt, eyeless head, and its gaping maw was a horrifying funnel of teeth, hungry for anything in its path. The pulsating beast shot past Sergei and Timur, who stood frozen in shock, before vanishing into the opposite tunnel, its fleshy tail end whipping out of sight. What the? Timur stammered, but Sergei clapped a hand over his mouth. Let it get farther away first. The hum of the retreating worm turned into crunching and grinding. Clearly, the thing was chewing through rock, carving out more of its perfect tunnels. Holy crap, Timur whispered once the creature was far enough. The faint grinding was the only reminder that a train-sized worm was out there, pulverizing stone with its teeth. Let's move, Sergei said, yanking Timur's sleeve. We can't just sit here waiting for that thing or its buddies to stumble across us. We gotta get out. Timur nodded, though the short rest hadn't done much for his strength. They moved more cautiously now, ready to bolt at the slightest hint of that rumbling. About 15 minutes later, they heard it again, close, but thankfully not crossing their path. What other crazy monsters are lurking in these catacombs? Timur sighed, a mix of exhaustion and resignation in his voice. At this point, I wouldn't be shocked if we ran into the devil himself and his whole posse. Save your energy and quit yapping, Sergei snapped. You're barely standing as it is. He wasn't wrong. Timur was shivering in his soaked clothes, every part of his body aching, especially his neck. Sleep was tugging at him hard, but he could only beg for short breaks. It irritated Sergei, but he'd grit his teeth and give Timur a couple minutes to rest, even though the exit was still nowhere in sight. Listen, Timur said, leaning against a smooth wall during another stop. How'd you decide to propose to Karina so quick? You've only been together, 6 months? Almost 8, Sergei corrected, clearly annoyed at revisiting the topic. That's still not long. You sure you want to tie the knot with her? Sergei brushed his matted hair back and shot Timur a sharp look. You gonna start telling me she's no good for me again? Whoa, I'm not trying to talk you out of it. Timur raised his scraped-up hands defensively. You're my best friend. Man, you've done more for me than my whole messed-up family ever did. I just want to make sure the guy the first owe everything to isn't making a bad call. You and her are so different. I've already made my choice, and I don't regret it, Sergei growled. I don't need your opinion on my life. They both fell silent, turning away from each other. The sting of disappointment in their friendship hit hard, and the endless maze only made their loneliness sharper. Sergei decided the break was over and marched on, taking the light with him. Timur followed like a shadow, wincing with every step. His chest burned with resentment. He'd never doubted Sergei before, but it seemed their friendship had become a relic of their youth, something Sergei had outgrown. His opinion didn't matter anymore. Sergei could keep major life decisions from him and treat him like some annoying kid to snap at instead of talk to. When had it all changed? Sergei, meanwhile, pushed forward, feeling the weight of everything he'd been ignoring. Hunger gnawing at his stomach, thirst parching his throat, exhaustion dragging at his legs, and the cold seeping into his bones. Saving Karina was still his guiding star, keeping despair at bay. But how long could that last? He was beat, and Timur's injuries were slowing them down even more. Plus, that constant judgmental stare boring into the back of his head didn't help. Then, Sergei started seeing things, or so he thought. Shadows of people flickered at the edge of his flashlight's beam. He brushed it off as exhaustion messing with his head and kept moving. But the shadows returned, more of them, denser, almost solid. He glanced at them and caught glimpses of blank faces and detailed clothing. For a moment, he was lost in their bottomless eyes, swirling with something eternal. God, this maze is driving me nuts, Sergei muttered under his breath. What did you say? Timur asked, perking up. Sergei turned to check on him. Timur, barely dragging himself along, clearly didn't see the shadowy figures circling them. You don't see anyone here? Sergei asked. Timur looked around nervously. Am I supposed to? No, Sergei said after a moment. Never mind. Let's go. It had to be hallucinations from exhaustion, so he didn't mention it to Timur. The last thing he needed was Timur suggesting they abandon Karina and turn back, especially when they both knew there was no going back. You feeling okay? Timur pressed. Need a break? I'm fine, Sergei snapped, picking up the pace. Well, I could use a rest. We've been at it for a while. God, you're killing me, Sergei exploded. We just stopped. If we keep sitting around, we'll never get out of here. His nerves were fraying. The shadow's watchful eyes pressing in from all sides didn't help, stirring up a quiet rage he tried to ignore. Sorry, Timur shot back, finally snapping. But it's your fault I jacked up my neck. I think I shifted a damn vertebra. And you've got no idea how much this hurts. For Christ's sake, Tim, you're such a wimp. You were a weakling as a kid. And you still are. I'm done babysitting you. When are you going to grow up? Timur's eyes blazed with fury. He'd been stewing for the last 15 minutes, but Sergei's words pushed him over the edge. Forgetting his pain and exhaustion, he lunged at Sergei, aiming a fist at his face to make him pay for that. Sergei dodged, but seconds later, they were grappling like street dogs, tearing into each other. Timur roared with hurt and rage, his punches leaving bruises on his childhood friend, while Sergei gave as good as he got, smashing Timur's nose and splitting his lip. The shadowy figures flickered in and out at the edge of their vision, watching the fight like silent spectators. But when Sergei shoved Timur hard, slamming his head against the tunnel wall, the shadows swarmed. They surrounded Timur as he slumped to the floor, nearly hiding him behind their dark forms. Sergei froze, unsure what his hallucinations were up to. Then Timur's swollen eyes widened, locking onto the figures. What the hell is this? He croaked. Who are you? Sergei's stomach dropped. If Timur saw them too, they weren't hallucinations. They were some new nightmare from this cursed place, biding their time until now. Shit! Sergei, help me. Timur panicked, reaching out a bloody hand through the mass of shadows. His arm got stuck, like it was caught in tar. The shadowy figures closed in tighter, wrapping Timur in a cocoon of their intangible forms, reaching for his battered face with greedy hands. Timur felt something vital slipping away, his body growing colder as their touch drained him. Sergei, he cried, voice breaking. But Sergei didn't move. He stood there, panting, watching the shadows feed on his former friend. Timur's words from the dead city echoed in his mind, how he'd said to leave Karina to the rats and save themselves. All the other jabs about his fiancée. Sergei, please, did I ask you to follow me? Sergei's eyes seemed to say before he turned and bolted, leaving Timur to the shadows' mercy. No! Timur's scream chased him through the tunnels. Sergei ran faster, pushing past his limits, terrified of losing the head start Timur's sacrifice had given him. The cries faded as he stumbled onto another intersection and froze, staring at a gaping, uncovered well in the center. He stopped at the edge of the deep, bone-dry pit. A rusted beam was embedded across it, holding a pulley with a rope vanishing into the darkness below. Anything was better than this endless maze. Timur's desperate shouts had gone silent, leaving the catacombs in an eerie hush. Afraid to look back and see the shadows closing in, especially the one that had once been his best friend, Sergei grabbed the rope and started descending into the well. His hands shook. Chapter 9. Everything the earth ever swallowed. The ancient pulley above creaked under Sergei's weight as he gripped the rope, legs wrapped around one side, hands clutching the other to control his descent. It wasn't easy. His muscles burned like they were on fire, but the thought of what had happened if he let go was enough to summon strength from nowhere. The bottom of the well was nowhere in sight, even when he tilted his head to shine his flashlight downward. Nothing but darkness waited below, but even that was better than the labyrinth and its prowling shadows. So Sergei kept descending, sweat pouring off him, the rope biting painfully into his palms. That pain felt like punishment for what he'd done. He'd sacrificed his friend to save his love. That's how he saw it. He'd left Timur to the shadows for a slim chance at surviving and finding Karina in these depths. His soul was tearing itself apart. Guilt over betraying Timur clashed with the broken promise to Karina. He tried to justify it. Timur was in bad shape, a burden slowing down the search. But then he'd remember the years they'd known each other, the scrapes they'd gotten out of together. Not this time. This time, the abyss had claimed them, dragging them to the darkest depths of oblivion, turning them into near enemies. Could he have done things differently? Tears slipped from Sergei's eyes, sparkling like diamonds as they fell into the blackness that greedily swallowed them. He knew the answer. So did the abyss. It was a necessary sacrifice. He muttered to himself, sinking deeper into the earth's bowels and his own self-torment. It won't be for nothing. I'll find my little mouse and get her out of here. She needs me. Timur's gone, but he'll live in my heart forever, despite all he said. My best friend. God, I betrayed his trust. What did I trade his life for? I let them kill him. His mind was splitting from the horrors, the exhaustion, the unreal visions haunting this endless descent into hell. Time slipped away, and so did control over his body. His movements became mechanical, sliding down the rope, squeezed by the rough walls. Soon, impossible images floated past his eyes. He didn't even focus on them, convinced they were illusions. The vertical shaft widened, revealing cracks and hollows branching off. His flashlight caught a hidden cave buried deep in the stone. Piles of forgotten junk stretched to the ceiling, broken furniture, ancient dishes, dusty trinkets, rotting bones, rusted metal, basalt pillars, shattered glass, faded fabrics, dried-out leather, wilted plants, yellowed parchment scraps, and more. Twisted cars, uprooted houses, and toppled statues, concrete giants drowning in a swamp of debris. In the distance, leaning towers and the decayed skeleton of a long train faded into the gloom. This was everything the earth had ever swallowed. Sergei could have swung over to explore, but he dismissed it as a trick of his fevered mind. No way someone could have gathered a kingdom of surface world trash down here, topped with heavy machinery and entire buildings. That kind of thing only showed up in delirious nightmares. So he kept descending, ignoring the junkyard layer. His hands were so weak they barely clung to the rope. His parched lips begged for the well to end, but fate wasn't listening anymore. After what felt like forever, his frozen fingers failed to grip tight enough. He slipped, picking up speed, until he clamped the rope with his knees and hands, shredding skin to bloody scraps. He screamed in agony, but the fall slowed and stopped. The rope ran out, and he dropped a short distance to the stone floor. His head thudded against it, the helmet held, but the flashlight shattered. The light was gone, leaving him in pitch-black darkness. He'd reached the bottom of the dry well, surviving the fall, but now he had no clue what lurked around him. Sergei rolled aside, whimpering from the searing pain in his hands. The agony blinded him but also snapped some control back into his body, letting him stand on shaky legs. Guided by instincts sharpened in the dark, he felt around. A warm breeze came from somewhere. Shivering from cold and pain, he stumbled toward it, tripping over rocks and banging into walls. His hands found a narrow passage leading out of the well's cave, and soon it brought him to light. Stepping out, Sergei froze, stunned by what he saw, then quickly told his foolish heart his eyes were lying. Nothing like this could exist underground. It had to be another hallucination, tormenting him for minutes, or maybe hours. But it felt so real, so vivid. The sounds, the smells, the mix of heat and cold, the ashy taste settling on his tongue. He almost believed it wasn't a delusion. Hell itself lay bare before him. A sprawling, multi-tiered metropolis stretched across the unreachable depths of the earth, built on an ocean of magma. Its orange glow and smoky haze rose from wide fissures stitched together by crude bridges. The sheer number of shacks and massive stone buildings was staggering, but the population of this underground refuge sent chills down Sergei's spine. The streets and stepped pathways drowned in a hazy swarm, thousands of flickering human shadows wandering, digging through trash, filling the city with a whisper of voices. Sergei swayed, barely staying upright. Beyond the shadows, he glimpsed other beings, creatures that could pass for nightmare spawn, though he doubted any living person had ever dreamed up such madness. Were these the creatures from the urban legend? Sergei recalled the rumors that brought their trio to the Catacombs, caves found during subway construction, said to lead to the Earth's core, home to ancient relics hiding from sunlight. And here they were, in their raw, primal forms. Sergei couldn't tear his eyes from this glimpse into the world's underbelly, until a dull pang of duty stabbed his heart, reminding him this wasn't the end. He had to find Karina. She could be here. Through the fog of creeping madness, the throbbing pain in his mangled hands broke through. He fumbled in his pockets for something to bandage them, finding only a broken watch he'd taken off at the ruined subway station. It felt like years ago. The digital display still showed a glitched 26:6, frozen in time. He ended up tearing strips from his pant legs, looking every bit the filthy vagrant now. At least the disguise might help him blend in with the bizarre locals. Sticking to the shadows, behind slums and piles of unsorted surface junk, Sergei slipped into the metropolis, scanning for any sign of Karina. But the city's layers of secrets kept pulling his gaze, distracting him from his mission. The surrounding phantasmagoria captivated him, pushing the boundaries of his fading mind. He skirted a jumbled pile of subway cars stacked into a shaky pyramid over nearby buildings. Their peeling yellow-beige paint and intricate carvings, almost like ancient script, covered the surfaces. The cars were a living anthill. Shadowy residents flickered in the windows, fixing up their homes or scratching new symbols into the metal. Sergei darted to the edge of the tier, hunting for a staircase or bridge to keep moving, then froze. Below, on a cleared platform, naked giants stood with toothless mouths gaping, heads tilted back, droning a hypnotic hum that filled the city. At their feet lay mummified bodies of their kin, with ashen skin and shriveled eyes. Watching this eerie ritual, a fading thought hit Sergei. This was the final secret of the subway. He and Timur had spent years exploring its depths, debunking myths or proving them true. Now, the wildest legend had come to life. The subway would never be the same to him. It was another world now, beyond human comprehension. He doubted he could ever return underground if he made it out. There'd be no point. He'd found everything he sought and lost everything he had. Slipping through a few tiers unnoticed, Sergei reached a bustling part of the city. No matter how stealthy he was, the shadows and other residents started noticing him, sensing an outsider. Trying to escape their stares, he ducked into a natural nook under a rocky outcrop at the tier's edge. But there was no peace here either. A man hung upside down on the wall, so emaciated his charred black skin clung to his bones. Blood trickled from his slit throat into vessels held by locals. He seemed long dead, yet the blood flowed endlessly, filling massive pots and clay amphors as tall as a person. Not wanting to take his place, Sergei slipped out of the hidden alcove and got swept into a noisy crowd. Shadowy ghosts flooded the streets, like some public festival was brewing. They clutched junk, metal scraps, dried human heads held by the hair, reminding Sergei of the rat swarm in the plague city, carrying gifts to their queen. The small always mimic the great. But where, or to whom, were these offerings headed? Some shadows, sensing his nature, reached for him with translucent black hands, their icy touches burning his bare torso. Sergei couldn't always dodge them, and each contact felt like it stole something vital. He broke free from the crowd's grip on a triangular plaza wedged between massive stone menhirs. It was less crowded, thanks to a grand monument of bronze statues, crouching figures that seemed oddly familiar. At its base, shadows danced silent circles, grazing the gleaming bronze. In the relative quiet, Sergei suddenly heard the distinct clatter of cartwheels on pavement. Real or not, his heart raced as he spun toward the sound, catching a glimpse of a cart pulled by rats crashing through the crowd. It carried corpses wrapped in shrouds, and a frail girl among them. "Karina!" Sergei shouted, charging after it. He plunged into the mass of ghosts, no longer caring about staying hidden. The rats had stolen his love and brought her to this cursed city, and he'd be damned if he let them take her now. Dozens of lifeless hands grabbed at him, their cold burning his skin, draining his soul as he fought to reach the purple flash of Karina's jacket. It was torture. He pushed forward, the ghosts sapping his essence with every touch. Like a dream, he broke through the crowd to the roadside and sprinted across a wooden bridge over a lava-filled chasm, its copper-red glow making him sweat. The procession of shadows marched toward some hidden destination in the city's depths, the rats pulling their load alongside. Sergei crossed more tiers, spotting a massive funnel-shaped pit under a man-made grotto, where the crowd was headed. The smooth-walled pit ended in a black hole instead of a solid bottom. At the edge, the residents dumped their offerings into the abyss, the items sliding into the earth's wormhole. The shadows dispersed, whispering a ritual song, but Sergei's focus was on the cart, now nearing the pit's edge. He was too late. It happened too fast. Just meters away, the Rat Kings turned the cart. The back gate clanged open, and the bodies, Karina among them, tumbled into the void. No, Sergei groaned, leaping over the edge and sliding down the pit after Karina, feeling his very essence slip away. Chapter 10. The Vale of Abaddon. The brief fall ended in a heap of discarded trinkets, trash, and corpses. Sergei wheezed, his bones and muscles screaming. As he sat up, a torrent of open tin cans and sticky slime poured from a round hole above, coating him in filth up to his neck. The helmet took the hit, but the stench of death and decay stripped away his humanity. Where was he? Why was he here? Who was he? Looking up, he saw a smooth hole glowing with soft orange light. His mind was like thick chestnut honey, slipping through his fingers, impossible to grasp. His thoughts and fears melted away, taking his last scraps of memory. He'd reached the bottom, paying for passage with everything he was. The nameless man rose, trudging through the pile of sacrificial offerings covering the cave floor. He stepped over shrouded corpses, glancing blankly at a lone helmet with a cracked, dying flashlight. He shuffled toward a narrow, pointed arch supporting the ceiling. A massive, pale hand appeared silently, filling the archway. It dug through the offerings, grabbed a wooden wheel, and withdrew into the next chamber with a soft rustle. The man followed, entering a hall dusted with ash and lit by a lava waterfall's bloody glow. In the center stood a colossus, its size dwarfing anything born above or below the earth. Its many arms were swarmed with locusts, and a dark veil fell from its horned head, hiding its face. The figure loomed before a vast mosaic on the cave wall, built from the pit's offerings. Shards of lives, memories, and oblivion forming a tapestry of the world's past, present, and future. The master's hands plucked fragments from the pile, adding to the horrific masterpiece. The nameless man gazed blankly at the prophetic canvas, watching shards and corpses, shadows and rust form a vision of creation and destruction. He saw humanity rise from ashes, destroying what came before, and he saw its end. When the master's work was done, it would lift its veil and behold the centuries-long creation. The earth would tremble, splitting open to release its hidden prisoners. At the mosaic's heart lay the harbinger of humanity's end, ringed by gleaming shards, heralds of doom who chose to descend into the abyss. The final pieces of the puzzle. A vivid amethyst spot stood out, a woman impaled on metal spikes, her last drops of life bleeding onto a man's withered body below, clad in black like a shadow. A spark of memory flared and faded in the man's eyes. Carrie? Nah. His eyes rolled back, madness claiming him as his mind grazed the edge of the master's perfect work. His body collapsed into the ash, and when the colossus reached for another fragment, it found warm flesh and placed the final piece in its rightful spot. The lovers, friends, and foes were forever locked in embrace, never to part. The finished work radiated unearthly splendor, and Abaddon lifted the veil to behold it.